over there sitting at the stage dealing with my Verizon account. Someone's hacked it again and bought another device.
Really?
Yeah.
My kids are really enjoying them, but...
Right? Merry Christmas.
Yeah, right, yeah. That sucks.
It's a pain in the ass to sit on the phone with.
Can you change account?
I guess I deleted my online account, Jen. I have no idea how this happened again.
Huh.
So, I guess I'll have to...
Wow.
I don't know. I'll figure it out later.
Pain in the neck, huh?
Yeah, I'm like, why is my bill over $500?
Yeah.
And then I get an email like, activate a new device. Meanwhile, my phone's all smashed up. I'm like, it'd be nice to have a new device.
Wish I did.
Right.
I love seeing pictures of the kids.
Oh, thank you.
You do such a great job. Do they ever get sick of it?
Yeah, totally. That's why you never see the bigger ones anymore, you know? Self-conscious because the boys look up my account and the kids look at it and she gets embarrassed.
Right.
Like, who would ever thought
How
that?
old's the little one?
She's 12, 7th grade.
Yeah, see, that's...
Yeah, it's tough. So she said, Mom, can I use your phone and block all? This is remarks that I don't care. I mean, block them all. She didn't do it, but like, you know, it's not as much as it used to. Yeah.
It's so much funner when they...
Easier.
I have an 8-year-old, but he's smile. Like another picture.
Right? I know. I've got to do their Christmas card, and I'm already like, oh, Christmas Warren and his card, coming in.
That's a big...
Cameras.
I'll get you.
Can everyone please be seated?
Am I sitting in your way?
No, there's a camera.
Alright, I'll probably like wide to the price of my nose. And then that's orange.
Transportation. I would like to express my appreciation to Commerce Committee Chairman John Thune and Ranking Member Bill Nelson for their support in allowing me to chair this important hearing. And I'd like to welcome my United States Senate colleagues who have joined me here today. My great partner from the state of Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and from the state of New Hampshire, a member of the Senate Commerce Committee, Maggie Haskell. We also welcome to members of the United States House of Representatives, Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas of the 3rd Congressional District, Congressman Seth Moulton of the 6th Congressional District, and a warm welcome to Congresswoman-elect Laurie Trahan. We look forward to continue to working with you and continuing to push for answers. It's been 74 days since Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover suffered a disaster that Andover Fire Chief Michael Mansfield said, quote, looked like Armageddon. Explosions and fires ripped through quiet neighborhoods, destroying homes and businesses. A precious life was lost. Dozens were injured. For these communities, the explosions were only the beginning of months of uncertainty and hardship. This was the coldest Thanksgiving in 80 years in Massachusetts, with the wind chill temperatures plunging into the single digits in the Merrimack Valley. And despite its original promise, Columbia Gas has missed its deadline for restoring gas service, meaning holiday enduring the brutal cold without heat. The explosions happened every single day. They try to stay warm and get back to work has gone on for far too long. We have seen unprecedented disruption, doubt, and despair for the Merrimack Valley. Columbia Gas should be ashamed. Our investigation into this disaster has resulted in one crystal clear conclusion. What happened on September 13th was not inevitable. It was preventable. Columbia Gas never contemplated that a disaster of this magnitude could happen, and therefore did not have adequate procedures in place to prevent it or to respond to it. Not only did this company not prioritize safety, it appears as if safety was simply an afterthought. But the responsibility for safety failures doesn't stop with Columbia Gas and NISOS. Federal regulations set by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, are alarmingly deficient. The safety gaps in federal rules mean that families all across the country cannot be assured that the natural gas pipelines running under their streets and into their homes are safe. PHMSA's regulations essentially allow the natural gas pipeline industry to regulate itself. When the fox is left to guard the henhouse, we are assured to have a system-wide failure and then an inevitable disaster. We found failing after failing in Columbia Gas culture and federal regulatory oversight. First, the company who had an understanding of the full pipeline system never saw or signed up on the pipeline plan that led to this disaster. Third, Columbia Gas still has not adopted best practices for safety 3 years after its own industry made these recommendations. And fourth, the woefully insufficient safety, operations, and response plans that Columbia Gas did institute never adequately contemplated a disaster of this magnitude. So when it occurred, they were not prepared to stop it or to respond to it. The list of failings at this company is as long as the line for the temporary showers at Pops Pond. And when it comes to federal regulations, there are clearly key gaps that allow a company like Columbia Gas and NISOS to operate unsafely. We owe it to the American people to put in place requirements to ensure that no natural gas company is allowed to shortchange safety ever again. Columbia Gas's deficiencies are more than a litany of shortcomings. They are a roadmap to disaster, and that's exactly what we saw on September 13th. On that day, following scheduled work in Lawrence, gas pressure in the Merrimack Valley's distribution system rose to dangerous levels. It forced harmful combustible gas out of people's stoves, radiators, and hot water heaters. This overpressurization led to explosions, fires, and the destruction of more than 100 homes. Died. He had just gotten his driver's license, only to be killed while celebrating this achievement with his friends. Our community mourns his loss, and I am grateful that his family could be here today to share his story. More than 24 others were injured, including 9 firefighters, as they ran towards the danger and worked to save lives in that chaos. The National Transportation Safety Board has recently recommended that Columbia Gas and its parent company, NISOS, make urgent changes to how they handle construction. So far, NISOS has refused to immediately implement these changes, and that is not acceptable. And I want to hear directly from the company why our communities are yet again having to break. Gas distribution companies need to put safety above speed and the public above politics. If Columbia Gas and NiSource refuse to do that, then they should not be operating in our state or any other state. This hearing is personal to me. My father grew up in Lawrence. He graduated from the vocational program at Lawrence High School. The day after the explosions, I went up and visited the house he grew up in on Phillip Street, a house where, as a little boy, I celebrated Christmases. I talked to a family member there, and they talked about their loss of power. And like tens of thousands of residents that day, their power and everyone in their neighborhood's power was out. They had no information, no comfort, no sense of when their lives would return to normal. No family should have to experience that kind of trauma and disruption. It's time for Columbia Gas and NiSource to answer for this disaster. The people of the Commonwealth have had to wait too long. So we thank you all for coming here today for this hearing. It will set the table for changes nationally to make sure that no one in Massachusetts or any other state ever has to suffer from such an accident. Now, let me turn to recognize my partner, my great partner in the United States Senate from the state of Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Senator Markey, for holding this hearing today. The Merrimack Valley is still reeling from the horrific series of explosions that occurred more than 2 months ago. The Rondon family lost their son, many people were injured, dozens of homes were destroyed, and businesses shuttered. And thousands of people are still without heat and hot water, living in temporary housing and unable to return to their normal lives. The communities of Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover have suffered immensely. I saw firsthand the destruction that these gas explosions caused across these communities. And I want to start by thanking our local officials and our first responders who acted quickly on September 13th and in the days that followed. In particular, I want to thank Mayor Dan Rivera, who has shown strong leadership throughout this very difficult time. We're here to say to everyone in the Merrimack Valley, we will keep fighting for you. We will not let up until every last home has heat and hot water, and until every last person has been compensated for their injuries and the disruption to their lives. Columbia Gas and NiSource are responsible not only for fixing this mess, but also for providing financial support to every resident and every business affected by the explosion. This disaster, which appears was wholly preventable, is on them. Confirms that a series of mistakes by, and I quote, a Columbia Gas contracted work crew, which included a Columbia Gas inspector executing one of the Columbia Gas designed and approved pipe replacement projects, caused these explosions. Our constituents deserve answers from Columbia Gas and NiSource. Two of them, Francisco and Esther Brea, are here in the audience today. The explosions cost them their home. Esther, an early childhood educator, also lost her business. They are still waiting for answers from Columbia Gas 2 months after the explosions, and we expect honest and thorough answers from the company. Our constituents deserve nothing less. This hearing is only a first step toward accountability for this disaster. The Massachusetts Congressional delegation has requested that the President issue an emergency declaration for the gas explosions. We're going to make sure that every family and every business is made whole. Then we're going to fight so that this never happens in another community again. This industry has proven that safety is not its top priority. So if they won't do what is right, then we should make sure that the laws and regulations compel them to do what is right. So thank you all for being here today.
Next, we're going to hear from Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Senator Markey, for convening this hearing. I also want to thank our chair and ranking member on the Commerce Committee. I'll just start by also extending my deepest sympathies to the Rondon family and to all of the families and individuals who have been impacted by this tragedy. We lost one precious life, and we all know that several others were hospitalized or injured. Families were displaced over Thanksgiving, and while we are grateful that they are safe, going through Thanksgiving without heat or hot water or living somewhere else is not acceptable. Businesses were disrupted and continue to be disrupted. We all know that we have to not only get to the bottom of what happened, but make sure that we take steps to ensure it never happens again in any other community. I also want to join my colleagues here in expressing our deepest gratitude to the men and women who worked tirelessly to respond to these explosions, to put out fires, to provide medical care to those who needed it. A number of those first responders were members of the New Hampshire first responder family, and we are so grateful for the mutual aid system that allows all of us to come together as needed in this region and do the work to keep our citizens safe. So again, my deep thanks to all of the first responders. We know that 131 structures were damaged, including several homes in Lawrence. And these explosions and this destruction was unlike anything any of our first responders or any of us had ever seen. Armageddon indeed, Senator Martin. I look forward to the discussion today and hope that we can be helpful in finding ways we can prevent this kind of disaster in the future. Confident that they can live in a home where their gas lines don't explode. In the year 2018, people should be confident that when there is a problem, that the response by industry will be swift and efficient and effective, and they can get their heat and their hot water back. What we saw in Lawrence and what we are continuing to see from the industry is unacceptable. I am grateful to all of the members of the community who came forward and who are working so hard to mitigate the damage and mitigate the disruption for families and businesses. But this should never have happened in the first place, and the slow response is unacceptable. And that's one of the reasons that I think all members of our Commerce Committee will continue to work together to determine how we can prevent this kind of disaster, this kind of disruption, this kind of heartbreak in the future. Thank you.
Now we're going to hear from Congresswoman Nikki Santos.
Thank you, Senator Markey, and thank you also for chairing this hearing today. It's so important to have it in the communities that have been impacted so that you all can hear firsthand, both from those who are responsible for the accident and the incidents in and of themselves, but also for those responsible for oversight. So I thank you so much for that. And I also want to thank the Senate Committee's leadership, John Thune of South Dakota, Bill Nelson of Florida, for their bipartisan support for holding this field hearing today. Since the information that we learned from the gas explosions, given the information that we have learned from the gas explosions that devastated the Merrimack Valley in September, it is now clear that this disaster was entirely preventable. Columbia Gas had a dangerously misguided and tragically incomplete process for pipeline replacement projects, and deficient decision-making by a field engineer was exacerbated by the company's appallingly weak internal review procedures. This series of incidents, which Senator Markey has described as, and appropriately so, a roadmap to disaster, resulted in the death of an innocent teenager, to their terrible loss, dozens of injuries, significant property damage, wide in hours and still ongoing, and not to mention the ongoing crisis for families still displaced by these explosions. We are so fortunate to have the extraordinary first responders, many of you here in the room today, the great leadership, political leadership of the communities impacted, but nevertheless, that is no substitute for the company's failings. I believe Columbia Gas has a responsibility to make this community whole and to restore the public trust, to guarantee the safety of their customers, and to prevent another tragic accident like this from ever happening again. And beyond that, we in Congress have a responsibility to look at and form our ways in which we oversee this.
Next, Congressman Seth Moulton.
Thank you, Senator Markey, for the time and putting this important hearing together. To the witnesses sitting before us, thank you for being here. And to my colleagues, Senator Markey, Senator Warren, and Representative Tsongas, I am grateful for your partnership in all things, but in particular through the last 3 months as our offices continue to seek answers to this tragedy and help our communities recover. Representative-elect Trahan, welcome. You have big shoes to fill. We're glad you're here. Through all the debates of appliance replacement and Thanksgiving dinners in recent weeks, it can become easy to forget how absurd, how fundamentally absurd this situation is in the first place. No evening with the fear that their house might blow up. Okay, terrorists in places like Afghanistan should go home in the evening. What this gas company allowed to happen through their negligence is too many families cold years unable to cook dinner. And we must never forget that one innocent, promising young man lost his life. Columbia Gas and NiSource, we appreciate the work you've done in the weeks since this tragedy, though we will question you on the details. But let me be clear, this situation is absurd. Your leadership must be held accountable, and it must never happen again. Thank God for the heroes of this story, the first responders, who responded when the company did not. We will never know how many lives you saved. We're proud to have you here. We're lucky to have you in our community. Thank you.
Well, we're losing who will start in 1 month. So we welcome you to this hearing, and so I recognize Congresswoman-elect Lori Trahan.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Markey. I'd like to thank Senators Markey, Warren, and Hassan for convening this hearing today in the heart of the disaster zone to discuss the gas explosions that rocked Lawrence, North Andover, and Andover on September 13th. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address this panel as the next Congresswoman representing Lawrence and Andover. I also want to thank Representatives Tsongas and Moulton for their tireless work on behalf of those affected by this accident. I too want to thank the valiant efforts of our first responders and the ongoing leadership of Mayor Rivera and so many others. I also want to extend my deepest condolences to the family of Lionel Rondon, and I thank them for being here bravely to share their story with us today. It's been 74 days. Today there are still over 5,000 people who cannot go home. And while most of the 680 plus businesses affected have been brought back online, too many owners have waited too long to be reimbursed for their lost income, lost wages. These people cannot wait any longer. We need these families, these businesses, these communities to be made whole. But we also need the people across this state to feel safe and secure. We can replace heat and appliances, but we need to get to the root cause of this disaster, to restore confidence and faith that our pipelines are safe and that this will never happen again. We need answers from Columbia Gas so that we can wring out every lesson from this disaster. I urge the representatives of Columbia Gas and NiSource to fully cooperate with the hearing, with the NTSB, and with all the investigations so that we can co-produce safety protocols and prescriptions for the future. I urge Columbia Gas and NiSource at a minimum to adopt API Recommended Practice 1173, the gold standard of safety practices for pipelines. API 1173 was born out of another pipeline disaster where 840,000 gallons of crude oil were dumped into wetlands in the Kalamazoo River in Michigan in 2010. These standards are strict, but they are the equivalent to the same safety standards governing our airlines, our chemical plants, and our nuclear power. Adopting these standards will ensure continuous improvement to increasing safety in the pipeline industry. I would like to thank the panel for this important work. I look forward to working with you on this issue and helping the people of the Merrimack Valley as we continue to cope with the aftermath, ensure safety and comfort, and restore this community's confidence. Thank you.
Now, I would like to begin the hearing by inviting up the Rondon family, Lucy, Miguel, and Rosalie, to join us to tell their story about September 13th and the terrible loss which their family experienced when their brother and son, Lionel, was killed. I know that everyone in this room expresses their condolences, shares their grief, and wants their family to know that we are and we want to as well thank them for their strength, thank them for their willingness to speak here today, because their story is a story which must be heard in order to ensure that we do put the laws on the books that ensure that it never happens again. So let us then turn to the family and ask if you would begin to tell the story.
So for all of you who don't know me, my name is Luciani Rondon. I am the sister of Lionel Rondon. Words cannot describe the pain my family and I feel at the loss of my brother, Lionel. Somebody I can almost hear him call my mother sitting in the room. He has such a warm heart. This senseless tragedy is the beginning of many things that my family and I will never do with Lionel again. My mother will never make him his favorite meal of shrimp and tostones again. My daughter, Rihanna, will never dance to her uncle Lionel's music he created just for her. Our little brother, Yanagi, will never go to the movies with Lionel again. We will never forget him. We will not let this loss be without meaning. The grief we feel is unbearable, but we know Lionel wants us to stay strong. So kind to others. He shoveled the snow for our neighbors. He carried groceries for the older people in our neighborhood. We will not have the joy of seeing the wonderful man we know he would have become. I stand in front of you in his honor. I will never have my brother back. But we hope there will be justice for him in the community. Nobody should ever go through what my family has gone through ever again. Thank you.
Our thanks to the London family. A powerful statement is something that we'll always remember, and I think it is very important for us to hear your story, because that will now help everyone understand the importance of the hearing which we're about to have, and why we must heed your warning that this should never happen again to any other family. So thank you so much for being here. Now I would like to ask the panel to come up and to be seated in front of your cars. And that would be the Honorable Robert Sumwalt, the Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, the Honorable Matthew Beaton, Secretary of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, of Columbia Gas of Massachusetts, Mr. Joe Hamrock, President and Chief Executive Officer of NiSource from Columbus, Ohio, Mr. Richard Kuperwitz, President of AccuFacts Incorporated, and Mr. Paul Roberti, Chief Counsel of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration in Washington, D.C. So if you could all please stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help me God. Let the record reflect that each answered affirmatively. So let us begin with you, Chairman Sumwalt. If you could begin your testimony and outline what you have found about what happened here in London.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Good morning, Senator Markey and distinguished members of Congress, Senator Warren, Senator Hassan, Congresswoman Tsongas, Congressman Moulton. Thank you for inviting the NTSB to testify this morning about the NTSB's investigation into the September fires and explosion here in the Merrimack Valley. I'd like to begin by offering our sincerest sympathies to all of those who've been affected by this tragedy. As you know, the NTSB is an independent federal agency. We're charged by Congress. We're charged by Congress to investigate transportation accidents, to determine the probable cause, and issue safety recommendations to prevent the reoccurrence of those accidents. We are not in the business of assigning blame or pointing fingers. Like with you, our goals are to determine what happened, why it happened, and what can be done to keep it from happening in the future. So based on our investigation so far, we know that the overpressurization of a low-pressure natural gas distribution system is what initiated the accident sequence. Prior to the overpressurization, crews were replacing the older cast iron distribution line with new plastic lines. However, the sensing lines that are necessary for detecting and controlling the pressure were not relocated to the new pipe. So, of course, once the old pipe was capped off, gas flow and pressure became substantially reduced. And because the sensing lines were connected to the old pipes, which now had low flow and low pressure, the pressure regulator commanded for a full flow of high pressure gas into the low pressure distribution system. This led to explosions and fires which were ignited by gas-fueled appliances. Why did it happen? We know that the tasks required for this work were developed and approved by Columbia Gas and did not account for the location of the sensing lines. Therefore, they did not require a relocation. We know Columbia Gas internal departments were required to review the plans, nor were they required to be approved by a professional engineer, also known as the PE. Further, we know that a practice had been discontinued several years ago by Columbia Gas that required personnel to be in place to monitor work on the gas mains and be available to immediately respond to any abnormalities. Our investigation will further look into why the placement of the regulator sensing line was not considered in the planning phase and why it was not caught by inspectors. As chairman of the NTSB, I want you to know that I've placed a high priority on properly completing this investigation. But as you can imagine, an investigation such as this is very complex and it will take time. But my commitment is we will do a good job and we will come up with recommendations.
Date range. The NTSB is investigating the cause of the September 13th tragedy, and we are cooperating with that investigation. NTSB's work continues, but I want to be clear with everyone here today. We are not waiting for the NTSB final report to take steps to make sure that something like this never happens again. On September 14th, we suspended work on all low-pressure systems across NiSource, except where necessary for compliance and safety. And as detailed in my written testimony, we have already identified new safety measures for the operation of our low-pressure systems, including a $150 million program to install continuous monitoring and protection against overpressure situations. We have also focused on additional training across our entire company. I am humbled by the spirit, optimism, and determination of our customers not to allow this tragedy to disrupt their lives any more than it has. But we know we have to do more, and we have to do it faster. We are focused on that, and I appreciate the leadership of the Massachusetts delegation. And before I close, I also want to offer our deepest gratitude to the first responders who answered the emergency calls on the evening of September 13th, and the gas workers who assisted them. What you did was heroic and remarkable, and we appreciate your work. The Merrimack Valley has a long road to recovery ahead. Our companies are committed to working with you and everyone here today to advance that recovery. I know this work is and will be the most important duty of my entire professional career. We are going to make the Merrimack Valley gas system safer than ever, and we're going to be here working with you to meet these commitments. Thank you, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you. Our next witness is Richard Kuprowitz, who is the president of Acufax Incorporated. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today on another pipeline event that could have been prevented. My name is Richard B. Kuprowitz, and I am president of Equifax Incorporated, based in Redmond, Washington. I have over 45 years of experience in the field. After many years of effort, Distribution Integrity Management Program, or DIMP regulation, became effective in August of 2011, though prudent gas distribution operators were implementing these critical safety process approaches well before this deadline. Since promulgation of important transmission and distribution integrity management performance-based regulatory steps in minimum pipeline safety regulations, I've investigated far too many pipeline disasters, which speaks volume for the need for further pipeline safety regulatory clarification and or improvement. Given the time limitations, I have focused on two important recommendations for the minimum pipeline safety regulations. Recommendation 1, add prescriptive requirements for management of change in regulation. Prescriptive requirements define shall and clearly define what an operator must do. In the important area of management of change, or MOC, the gas industry mainly relies on the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, or ASME, standard, Management System Integrity of Gas Pipelines, ASME B318S, that supplements ASME B318. Both are performance-based standards. Parts of both of these industry practices are incorporated by reference in current federal pipeline safety regulation. Given the importance of management of change in pipeline safety, I recommend this process shall be prescribed by clear wording in pipeline minimum safety regulation. Industry practices development does not necessarily undergo the more public review and scrutiny and possible challenge that pipe safety regulation undergoes when reaching the higher obligation of promulgation into law. Incorporation of the exact wording of MOC protocols into federal pipeline safety regulation also makes such regulation accessible to the public that could be impacted in the event of a pipeline failure. Congress made an attempt in the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011 to rectify this difficulty for public access to important reference pipeline safety documents, but this well-meaning effort was circumvented by subsequent lobbying efforts to restrict such easier public access. Given the complexity of changes within many gas distribution system operations, Congress should require that pipeline safety regulation prescriptively incorporate critical minimum steps required for all management change procedures that will cover both equipment and procedures. My second recommendation 2, require the use of leak mapping in DIMP. A creative pipeline operator can tamper with the evaluation of important metrics required to be reported annually to PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Material and Safety Administration. This is especially true in the area of DIMP regulation, calling for the operators to evaluate and rank risk. Risk ranking can generate a wide range of outcomes developed from the same data. During the evolution of DIMP regulation, considerable discussion occurred related to displaying hazardous leak data by graphic mapping using computers and advanced mapping software in the late 2000s. The mapping approach did not make it into the final DIMP regulation because an argument was presented at the time that many operators, especially the smaller operators, did not have access to computers, and simpler to use developing mapping software was still evolving. Many gas distribution operators now recognize the importance, the efficiency, and safety benefits of computer leak mapping by grade, by cause, and by pipe type, such as mains or service lines, and quickly assisting in the evaluation of leak risk on their gas distribution systems. Such graphic, color-coded computer mapping greatly aids the rapid analysis of large volumes of data to assist in quickly recognizing and identifying systemic geographic hotspots that might warrant further attention and resources to prudently control risk on their systems. Such leak mapping also helps to identify areas of a gas distribution system where one call may not be effective. Quite simply, in the important area of leak evaluation and risk ranking, if a gas distribution operation cannot incorporate such a technically advanced and relatively inexpensive computer tool into helping to improve pipeline safety, they should not be in the gas distribution business. Congress should direct development of simple regulations to require the use of computer leak mapping and reporting technologies into gas distribution safety to assist in evaluating and ranking risk.
The state pipeline safety programs. On the afternoon of September 13th, when the incident occurred, PHMSA made an immediate decision to deploy multiple inspectors to the scene to provide technical assistance to both the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and the National Transportation Safety Board. As some of you know, PHMSA's leadership also reached out on the evening of the incident to keep members of the Massachusetts congressional delegation apprised of PHMSA's efforts and role. Since the time the tragedy unfolded, PHMSA's team of experts have provided hundreds of hours of technical assistance, and we will continue to do so until the Massachusetts and the NTSB complete their investigations. I also want to share some information about the state pipeline safety programs that PHMSA administers. The federal-state partnership with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts spans over 35 years. Massachusetts is a certified state partner with inspection and enforcement responsibilities for intrastate natural gas distribution and transmission pipelines. As a matter of federal law, the Commonwealth possesses jurisdiction to investigate and make determinations regarding an operator's compliance with federal and state regulations. We also recognize the NTSB's jurisdiction and expertise for leading the investigation and determining the probable cause of this tragic accident. While the NTSB's preliminary report identified circumstances that likely contributed to the overpressurization during the pipeline replacement project, PHMSA eagerly awaits the completion of both investigations so that we will have all requisite information concerning the cause of the incident and the operator's compliance with pertinent regulations. This terrible accident shows how critical it is for pipeline operators to comprehensively understand their systems, including the design, construction, and operation of all facilities. Operators and qualified contractors must exercise extreme care and diligence in every aspect of their work. Above all, they need to nurture and maintain a safety culture that promotes the highest level of safety so that the tragic pipeline accident that occurred in Merrimack Valley never happens again. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to a round of questions from the members of Congress. Mr. Hamrock, will you commit under oath today that you will guarantee that every family, every business is made 100% financially whole for the disaster which occurred on the property of Columbia Gas?
Senator, yes, we take responsibility for the incident and the consequences of the incident, and from the very beginning we've committed to working with each of the affected individuals, families, and businesses to ensure that we fully understand the impact on them and that we work with them closely to fully compensate them for their losses.
So you will make them 100% financially whole?
We will work with them to fully understand, not just financially.
Will you make them 100% financially whole?
Yes, we will,
okay.
and we'll work with them for all other effects that they may have experienced.
The families and businesses need to hear that. Mr. Hamrock, the National Transportation Safety Board, Chairman Zumwalt testified to this, issued an urgent set of recommendations 2 weeks ago in an interim report. which I have here. It's an urgent report, and it said that the company should take all of these additional safety measures immediately. Do you commit to adopting every one of these urgent safety measures now?
Senator, the NTSB's recommendations are aligned with our objectives. We are already implementing some of those. We began.
No, I asked you if you would implement all of the recommendations.
We will work with the NTSB to fully understand and implement the recommendations they've made.
It's been 2 weeks since they issued these urgent recommendations. Why can you not commit to implementing urgent recommendations from the NTSB right now? All of them.
Senator, we are committing to implement those recommendations.
All of them?
Yes, all of them. And in fact, we have already implemented a number of them in the weeks subsequent to the tragedy occurring. And in some cases, we've gone above and beyond those recommendations already.
It's critical that all of them be implemented now. In the immediate aftermath, you said that you would review them, but in reviewing, you said that you will now implement. Next, the NTSB found that a single unqualified engineer was allowed to approve the construction job that caused the disaster with no oversight from experienced technicians that would have understood the implications for the entire pipeline system. It's unacceptable and shows a culture of complacency that Columbia Gas would allow someone so unqualified to make unilateral decisions about pipeline construction projects. Mr. Hamrock, were you aware that this was a practice occurring at Columbia Gas?
Senator, we are reviewing the NTSB's findings in this regard, looking at all of the underlying factors that would have contributed to that situation, committed to getting to the bottom of it, and will not stop until we...
Were you aware that there was an unqualified engineer doing the review of the project? Were you aware?
I was not personally aware.
Mr. Bryant, were you aware?
Senator, I am aware of the fact that engineers who work on our system are not always professional engineers. That's somewhat standard in the industry.
It is a standard that is too low. To have a safety decision made by an unqualified engineer is unacceptable. Will you commit right now to having all future pipeline construction plans signed off on by a qualified engineer and the Columbia Gas officials who know the entire pipeline system as the NTSB has recommended? Will you commit to that?
Senator, yes, we have already begun to implement that. Where we do not have professional engineers in place, we will work with outside firms to ensure that we do, in fact, bring professional engineers to oversee the work. And we'll work with the NTSB to make sure that we fully understand and clarify the intent of that recommendation.
All right, well, that was a catastrophic mistake. The entire company failed. The buck does stop with you. Your company gave too much power to a low-level engineer with too little information. Next, up until 4 years ago, Mr. Hamrock, it was company policy to have a trained technician present in the pressure monitoring station when construction work was being done. If a technician had been on site here in Lawrence on September 13th, they likely would have seen the pressure spike, immediately turned off the gas, and potentially avoided this whole disaster. But according, again, to the NTSB, your company abandoned that requirement 4 years ago for that common sense safety measure. It took 26 minutes after the Columbia Gas control room received the high pressure alarms for someone to shut down the gas at the regulator. 4 years ago, you would have had someone there to shut down immediately during that critical 26-minute gap. That did not happen because you abandoned that policy, and the result was disaster. Saving money as a way of increasing profits, but at the expense of safety, leads to disaster, Mr. Hamrock. Do you commit to having someone there on site from now on to make sure it never happens again?
Senator, safety is a core value for us, the core driver of everything that we do. We've reviewed that recommendation and that finding. Further review is required to fully understand it. We do commit to putting automatic shutoff capabilities in all of our systems, not just with somebody stationed at the regulator during construction work, but on a continuous basis.
Again, will you commit to changing the policy?
We do commit to putting automatic shutoff capabilities across all of our low-pressure regulator systems, which goes above and beyond the NTSB recommendation, because it'll be continuous automatic shutoff.
Will that satisfy you, Chairman, somewhat?
I cannot commit on behalf of the entire board. I'm one of 5 members of the board, but I like what I hear there, the automatic shutoff valve. We've called for that in other accidents.
Okay. And down to you, Mr. Kuperitz. The fine that can be levied is $2 million. This disaster could cost upwards of $1 billion. Is that fine too low, Mr. Kuperitz? What should the fine be? It seems to me for Columbia Gas, it's like paying a parking ticket for something that created a catastrophic accident. Where should these fines be set?
Well, you ask a valid question. I've investigated too many multi-billion-dollar disasters from pipelines, and that's multi-B with a billion. The fines, you could argue, and there's been a lot of debate on this over the decades. What's the purpose of the penalty? I can't give you a dollar answer, but what I can tell you is it should be high enough to change the culture so that they don't repeat the mistakes that are obviously going to be investigated and reported on. And so penalties aren't necessarily to be punitive, they should be trying to modify the culture. If they can't do that, then they're not high enough. And I'm sorry to be giving you a glib answer, but I'm giving you an honest, truthful answer.
Well, it's not a glib answer. You're saying they're not high enough. They have to be much higher. It has to discourage Columbia or any other company from ever turning a blind eye to the safety problems in their company, because they know that the fine is the equivalent of a parking ticket.
It gets even worse because the actual penalty that is assessed is very seldom actually collected. It's a very small percentage, even less than that. So you're more on the same wavelength here.
Yeah, well, again, boosterism leads to complacency, and complacency leads to disaster. When you assume that there can be no accident, and the fine is so low if there is one, then it creates the conditions of complacency that does result in disaster. So these federal fines have to be dramatically increased if we're going to discourage this activity from ever occurring again in the future. And I would say to you, Mr. Hamrock, that my question to you is, given what's happened, given this catastrophic event, do you think that you should be any longer allowed to run this company, given the catastrophe which has occurred?
Senator, the consequences alone of this tragedy motivate me to dedicate the remainder of my professional career to ensuring that nothing like this ever happens again. That becomes the sole driver. I take responsibility on behalf of NiSource and on behalf of Columbia Gas, and as CEO, I'm accountable to be sure that this never happens again, and that we restore these communities to where they were. We won't stop. We're here for the long run. We won't stop until we're committed to that, and that's what I pledge.
Well, Mr. Hamrock, I'm not sure that you should be allowed to continue to be the CEO of this company, given what happened. I think it is absolutely imperative that there be some price we should pay for what has happened. Let me turn now and recognize my colleague, Senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you, Senator Markey. So what happened in the Merrimack Valley is horrible, plain and simple. It is even more infuriating that this is not the first time that Columbia Gas and NiSource have failed to provide safe gas service to its customers. In 2012, a Columbia Gas worker punctured a mislabeled steel service line in Springfield, Massachusetts, resulting in an explosion that injured 17 people and caused an estimated $1.3 million in property damage. Mr. Hamrock, following the Springfield explosions, was your company pressed to improve your pipeline safety processes?
Senator, in that instance, as you noted, one of our employees was investigating the call on a leak, and in the course of that investigation, punctured the service line during a process called bar holing, looking for the gas under the pavement. After that, as we always do in any sort of incident, whether it occurs on our system or others, we take actions that are designed to prevent something like that from ever happening again. And we did, in fact, change procedures and change bar holding procedures.
So that's a yes?
It's a yes, yes.
Okay. Columbia gas leaks also occurred across the Commonwealth in Walpole in 2004 and 2007, in Easton in 2007, in West Barnstable in 2009, in West Springfield in 2011, and in Seekonk in 2012. Following those leaks, did you take action to improve safety?
In every case, when there's an incident, whether it's caused by damage from an outside party, weather-related, any sort of asset-related condition, we always look for an opportunity to learn and make changes and take actions as a result of what we learn from those. So yes.
We're here not because, and I think this is what you're saying, not because of one individual engineer or one mislabeled engineering plan, but because of a series of problems. And I'm concerned that these events, culminating in the deadly explosion 3 months ago, expose a corporate culture that isn't adequately focused on safety. You know, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Hamrock, corporate culture is on you. Corporate priorities are on you. And that's why I want to ask about personal responsibility here. On October 11th, the National Transportation Safety Board, the federal body charged with determining what caused this tragedy, released an interim report on the Merrimack Valley explosions, which clearly identified a series of failures by Columbia Gas. So, Mr. Bryant, you're the president of Columbia Gas. That means the buck stops with you. The NTSB reports reveal unambiguous failures by the company that you run that contributed to this tragedy. I just want to know, do you take personal responsibility for the breakdowns that led to these explosions?
Senator, I take responsibility for the actions in the company, and I'm responsible at this point to make sure that we thoroughly understand what happened and why.
So you take personal responsibility here. Can I ask you the same question, Mr. Hamrock? You're the CEO of NiSource, the company that owns Columbia Gas. The NTSB reports also clearly identified failures by NiSource that contributed to this tragedy. Do you take personal responsibility for this tragedy?
Senator, yes, I take responsibility for the culture as well, as you noted, and safety is our core value. It drives everything we do.
So let me ask you what personal responsibility means to you. Mr. Hamrock, how much were you paid last year?
My compensation is a matter of public record, and it's in the range of $5 million.
$5 million, okay. And Mr. Bryant, how much were you paid last year?
My compensation was approximately $550,000.
Okay, a little over $500,000. Mr. Hamrock, has your pay been reduced as a result of this disaster?
Senator, again, I take full responsibility.
That's a yes or no question. Has your pay been reduced as a result of this disaster?
I fully expect to be held accountable, with compensation being an important part of that, and in fact have recommended to our board that my bonus be withheld. So
your bonus may be withheld in the future. And Mr. Bryant, was your pay reduced as a result of this action?
Senator, a significant portion of my compensation, above $230,000, is in Senate compensation. I have suggested to Mr. Hamrock that any payment of any incentive in this year would be inappropriate.
So you're going to reduce, so you will lose your, people died in this explosion and you're going to lose your incentive bonus this year? Is that right?
Senator, the first conversation I had with Joe Hamrock, and that's the conversation that we had, is that something in the order of $300,000.
Okay, so you may lose your incentive bonus, or you may not.
I'd like to clarify that. I think I was more specific with Mr. Hamrock. I said that I did not think that it should be paid, and if offered, I would not accept.
Okay, you hope you will lose your incentive bonus. Is that what you just said?
No, I'm sorry, Senator. I said that. I said that I told Mr. Hamrock that I did not think that the payment of an incentive this year would be appropriate.
Okay, who's going to be responsible for determining whether or not you get your incentive bonus? Is it Mr. Hamrock?
Senator,
I just want to figure out what personal responsibility means to you too.
personal responsibility goes beyond compensation.
Let's start with compensation. I'm fine with beyond compensation. But I just want to know, you kept your jobs and you're still getting paid what sounds like a lot of money. And I want to know what personal responsibility means here. Let me ask you another question. You said, Mr. Bryant, right after the explosion, I see no cause to fire anybody with what I know so far. So who exactly at Columbia Gas has been held responsible for the shortcomings that were identified in the NTSB report? Have you fired anyone?
Senator, the review is underway. We will take all appropriate actions based on the final findings, the ultimate understanding of what happened here, personal accountability, including organizational responsibilities, and compensation will all be a part of that. The most important thing is that we get to the core set of facts and understand what happened, who's accountable, make sure we make a consistent and complete set of recommendations.
Let me stop you there. The most important thing is not just that we find out what happens. The most important thing is that we make changes so that it doesn't happen again.
I agree.
And I started my line of questions with how many times you have stood up and said, in effect, publicly, this will not happen again. Yes, there's been an accident, there's been a mistake, but we're going to improve safety and this will not happen again. And we can go through the list a second time or a third time. That's just right here in Massachusetts. And yet, now that we've had a huge tragedy, now that someone has died, now that people have been injured, now that people have lost their homes, you're saying exactly the same thing you said every time in the past. And you sit here and say, I apologize, and I'm glad to hear that, and I hope that it's sincere. And you say, I take personal responsibility, but I'm just not seeing any impact from that. I'm not seeing a company that takes safety seriously, and I'm not seeing people at the head of the company who take any personal accountability for the kind of tragedy that culture that is not focused on safety causes to the public. The people in this room have been injured. You have not. You continue to keep your jobs, to collect your big paychecks, and to go on about your business. Personal responsibility means you step up in this, not simply that you back away and say you'll figure out how other people can deal with this problem.
Chair recognizes Senator Hassel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Let me just start by saying you can count me in with my colleagues, Senator Markey and Senator Warren, in questioning why it is that the people of Lawrence and Andover and North Andover, or the people in New Hampshire, or any American you all serve, should have to rely on your culture. Because I will add my concern to that you just heard from Senator Warren, that there have been safety incident after safety incident after safety incident just here in Massachusetts, and it does not seem to have changed your culture. And that is of grave concern, because this can't happen again. And I'm sitting here saying that, and of course others have said that after other accidents with your companies and others. It's 2018 in the United States of America, and nobody should be worried when they come home at night that their house is going to explode. Nobody. So let me now turn to you, Mr. Sumwalt, because I want to figure out what we now do so that we're not just relying on the culture of private enterprise, and we are in fact doing what we should do as Americans to require and implement standards that will keep us safe. I understand that one of the recommendations issued in the NTSB's preliminary report is to require that a professional engineer issue a seal of approval for public utility engineering drawings. Now, I have to say, when I read that, I was astounded that we don't require that. It's my understanding that neither Massachusetts, nor New Hampshire, nor many other states require such a seal of approval, although I understand from the Secretary that that is changing in Massachusetts. It seems to me that if this change, requiring such a seal of approval, could have prevented death and injury in the Merrimack Valley explosions, it would be worth alerting state governments so that they can respond accordingly. And I think you touched on this in your testimony, but can you help me understand what the NTSB is going to do to issue guidance to states that make sure that they take the steps they need to require professional engineer seal on these types of drawings?
Thank you for your question, Senator Hassan. And of course, our immediate focus is on this particular tragedy here in the Merrimack Valley. I would envision that part of our total package, our total investigation, we would want to look and see what the requirements are from various states. As you pointed out, about 29 states do not require this professional engineer sign-off. So I can envision that that would be something that we would ultimately recommend.
Is there any reason you shouldn't be recommending it right now? So that state legislatures will come back next month to state houses across the country. Why shouldn't the top of their agenda be, not to mention the top of Congress's agenda be, to implement this requirement as a matter of state regulation or state law? Why shouldn't the NTSB be out front saying this is something you could do right now, this legislative session, to make sure that gas pipelines are safer?
Well, I certainly hear what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying. Again, our immediate focus is on this particular event, so we've scoped the recommendations to address this event. But, as I mentioned, I suspect this investigation will have many, many recommendations that are broad-reaching.
Well, I appreciate that. What I would urge you all to do is when a recommendation, even if you haven't finished the complete review, seems like there's an obvious recommendation out there that state legislators could act on immediately, get that recommendation out there, and there are lots of us who want to work with you to do that. Mr. Krubowitz, I want to touch a little bit on your testimony. You say in your testimony that using computer leak mapping and reporting technologies could help guard against incidents like the one in Merrimack Valley. Can you please discuss the role of technology in providing a backstop against human error and whether or not you think state and federal governments have the resources to implement that kind of technology?
Well, actually, there are a couple states, and I won't name a couple of them because of non-disclosure agreements, who have required, as a matter in their PUCs or PSCs, in their settlements for pipe replacement and that, to have the company present annually their leak detection results in computer maps, and then they can sort them and filter them. And so when you see in some of these areas the numerous leaks, even hazardous leaks, the grade ones, and it fills up the page, well, that doesn't really do you a lot of good. So you gotta use the computer to filter it.
Right.
And so I guess the example I'd use is I used Apple Maps to find Lawrence today when I drove from Connecticut this morning, visiting my daughter. And it works. It's not a real complicated system. You can do the same thing with, not with the complications of a bleak map or with Google mapping or Apple mapping, but they're very easy tools out there. They've been around for 10 years, and they're getting more sophisticated. And so a simple little portable computer can do exactly that.
Okay, so what you're telling us is that there are models out there that could be used that could help prevent this kind of incident from occurring.
Well, it'll help indicate where are you doing pipe replacement where it really needs to be first?
Right.
And then if you're doing pipe replacement and it didn't really need to be the first one to be done and it exposed you to a catastrophic overpressure event for other reasons,
right,
that could have been avoided.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roberti, does PHMSA have the necessary cybersecurity framework to rely on new technologies for safety like the ones we just heard about?
Senator, did you say cyber?
Yeah, so we're talking about computer programs, we're talking about new technology to help prevent this kind of incident, and of course the new technology has to be protected by strong cybersecurity. So does PHMSA have that kind of capacity?
We invest a lot in R&D research with universities on that front. Cybersecurity on the pipeline side is within the Department of Homeland Security, the Transportation Security Administration. We work with them very closely. In fact, we're about to execute an addendum to an existing memorandum of understanding on how to bolster that area. In terms of this area about leak mapping, the distribution integrity management protocols within the regulations envision that pipeline operators will know their systems, prioritize where the risks are, and then prioritize investments. This type of technology should be employed if it's available and can be employed, and I think that's something we'll continue to look at as well, how we can harness technology.
Thank you. And just in the interest of time, I'll end my line of questioning, but I do want to follow up with you because I think your agency has been slow in responding to GAO recommendations about ways to improve, and obviously that needs to change. Thank you.
Congresswoman Saunders.
Thank you, Senator Markey. And I think you can hear from all our questions up here the deep concern, obviously, about the impact on the residents of the Merrimack Valley, but also the culture and processes and procedures in place within the company that led to this. So a lot of work to be done, and I think we're grateful for the NTSB, who's bringing some clarity, some objective clarity to just why this happened and what steps should be taken to prevent it from happening again. So I wanted to go to you, Chairman Sumwalt, and ask you, can you talk about the additional steps that you will be taking to conduct the investigation? You've issued a detailed preliminary report, I think, which was very concerning to all of us up here, showing, I think, in fact, that this could have been prevented. But what will be the focus of your investigation moving forward?
Well, thank you. Of course, we did want to get out those interim safety recommendations because we felt that they were very important to get those out early. So in addition, I believe we've certainly identified the proximate cause of the accident. Of course, that's an overpressurization. We understand why the system overpressured. And so you could say, well, we figured the accident out. Our investigations are very thorough. So in addition to identifying really the proximate cause, we want to look at the organizational culture of NiSource and Columbia Gas. That's not as easy as going out and finding a sensor that is attached to the wrong line.
How do you do that? How do you look at the organizational culture?
Well, and that's very tricky, and that's why it takes time, but we do that by looking at prior practices. We've heard about prior events that they've had. We will look at by interviewing their senior management, by not only the senior leadership, but we want to interview the people that are in the rank and file. Oftentimes we find there's a difference between what the people at the top of the organization are saying and what people on the front line are actually perceiving. So we will continue to look at that. We will also look at the regulatory oversight, not only from the federal oversight, but from the state oversight as well. So that's what our entire investigation will look at. Additionally, we will be looking at the emergency response. So that's really the plan at this point.
Have you found everybody to be cooperative? They're providing the documents, the people that you feel you need to talk with, that NiSource and Columbia Gas have been cooperative?
Yes, ma'am, we found them to be very cooperative with the NTSB.
So you've had no incidents with them?
I'm sorry, but
So you've had no incidents with them having to insist on being able to talk with someone, any people sort of trying to avoid their conversations with you?
The truth is, I feel like we've had a very open dialogue with NiSource and Columbia Gas.
And how long do you think it's going to take to get to your final report? I know you said it's complicated.
It is indeed a priority. Usually our investigations, our pipeline investigations are running between 12 and 24 months. As I mentioned in my testimony, I've placed a priority on this to make sure that it is done in a timely fashion. Meanwhile, if we do see the need for urgent recommendations or interim recommendations, we will certainly come out with those.
So whatever recommendations you make will be specific to the company? Or will it be, could there also include recommendations around the regulatory framework, either at state or federal level?
Yes, ma'am, and I'm sorry I couldn't clearly hear that, but our recommendations, if they're interim recommendations, could be broad-reaching. As you know, in our last recommendation package that came out 11 days ago, they were not only to NiSource, but they were to the state of Massachusetts as well.
And in terms of all the accidents you've investigated, where does this fall along the trajectory of seriousness?
Well, all of the accidents the NTSB investigates are very tragic in their own right. This one, of course, is devastating to not only the families involved, but to the entire community.
And so you're hesitant to put it in somewhere in the...
Well, that's always tricky, because even if one person loses their life, that in itself is tragic. So I think that they are all tragic, and our thoughts and prayers are with the people of this community.
Mr. Hammer, do you dispute any of the NTSB's findings to date?
No.
So you accept their findings?
We accept their findings and are working with
whatever
them.
it may say about the company.
Yes.
Mr. Hammer, I wanted to ask a couple of other questions. There have been significant costs that the company has incurred, rightfully so, and those will, I'm sure, be ongoing, and we won't know the final number. But can you make a commitment that the costs that you have incurred will not be passed along to the ratepayers?
We have approached this with no regard for anything but taking care of our customers and understanding their needs, and have not focused on recovery or any other.
Well, you may not be focused on it to date, but in the future, when you come to grips with the total impact on your bottom line, can you make the commitment that you will not pass the cost along to the ratepayers?
I'm not in a position today to make such a commitment. We've not spent any time focusing on that question.
Well, I think I take great exception to that statement. Thank you, and I do that.
Congressman Bolton. Thank you, Senator. Mr. Bryant, my job description as a Marine infantry officer was very simple. You're responsible for everything your platoon does or fails to do. One sentence. You said in your statement initially that you take responsibility for recovery. Why did you not include in your statement that you take responsibility for the disaster?
Congressman, I apologize. That was not an intentional omission. I take responsibility for the actions that took place that led to that, and that responsibility is now to understand how that happened, and my further responsibility is to work with the rest of the NiSource team to make sure that something like that never happens again in Columbia Gas or NiSource or any other gas distribution company in the United States.
Mr. Bryant, Mr. Hamrock talked about his responsibility for the safety culture of your company. Mr. Hamrock said that safety is a core value. Now, it's one thing to have a value and quite another to actually live up to it. Do you think that your company, Columbia Gas, lives up to having safety as a core value?
I absolutely believe that NiSource has safety as a core value.
We know they have it as a core value. They've stated that. I'm asking you if you live up to that value.
Yes, we do. I'll give you the best example that I have is that any Columbia Gas employee can stop any activity at any time if they believe that act is unsafe.
So then let's go to the afternoon this tragedy occurred. There were 2 alarms at 4:04 and 4:05 p.m. received at your monitoring station, I believe in Ohio. What action did your company employees take when those alarms went off?
They notified resources in Massachusetts that there was an overpressurization and dispatched resources to the regular
What
station.
resources, Mr. Bryant? What resources were dispatched?
Management regulation resources, the on-the-ground resources.
Mr. Bryant, are you aware that, or were you aware in the past that overpressurization of a gas pipeline can cause explosions? It could lead to the loss of life?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Were you aware of that before this tragedy occurred?
Yes.
So it seems to me that if you're aware that overpressurization of a gas pipeline could cause loss of life among your customers, and if you receive 2 alarms at your facilities, that simply notifying some regulators that there's an overpressurization incident doesn't do much to help your customers. That doesn't seem much like a culture of safety. At what time did you notify customers of the problem so that they could take action to secure their homes and save their own lives?
Congressman, public safety officials took those actions immediately.
I'm well aware of that. We're lucky they're here because otherwise a lot more people would have died. But if you're taking responsibility for this, when did you notify your customers?
Congressman, first and foremost, I have to acknowledge and thank the public safety officials. They were on the ground. This was a widespread event, and they took the actions necessary to keep the public safe, and we will be forever grateful to them for that.
Thank you very much. Now you can answer my question. At what time did you notify customers that their homes could start blowing up?
Again, Congressman, we did not need to do that. Public safety officials.
Well, let me help a little bit, Mr. Bryant, because on your website you posted a notice at about 9 o'clock that evening, 5 hours after the 2 alarms were received by your facility, that there is a, quote, incident in the area and that customers should make themselves safe. 5 hours. That does not strike me as a culture of safety among your employees or at your organization.
Congressman, I will readily admit that one of the weakest areas we had in the earliest hours of this event was in communication. And we intend to take that experience and learn from that.
And how are you going to learn from that, Mr. Bryant?
We will review the actions and the circumstances that took place in that evening and determine what we could do to make sure, God forbid, anything like this ever happens again.
Okay, but here's something that's very simple. If your company culture cares about safety, and if you and your employees care about the lives of the customers you serve, then you should let them know that their houses might explode and not wait 5 hours to do so. Do you agree with that?
I might suggest that I see this in a different way. In those hours immediately after the explosions and fires, all of our employees were focused on making the system safe, getting to all of the regulator stations that fed into that distribution system, making sure that all 14 points of gas flow were shut off, and that customers were out of there.
Mr. Bryant, several reports and constituents of mine have stated numerous instances where Columbia Gas reps simply ran away from residents who were bombarding them with questions they didn't know the answers to. That's not a culture of safety. We're going to hear later from Mayor Rivera, Lawrence. And in his testimony, he will say, quote, "It appeared to many of us that Columbia Gas did not have an actual plan for dealing with a disaster of this magnitude, as if it never crossed their minds that this could occur." To me, Mr. Bryant, that's not a culture of safety. Mr. Hamrock, what was the profit margin for NiSource in last fiscal year?
In 2017,
2017.
$1.20 per share, earnings per share.
And do the math. What's the overall profit? How many shares out there?
Well, on the order of 300.
300 million?
Some million.
300 million. What is the cost of this tragedy? The latest estimate?
We've disclosed this tragedy. The full cost, it looks like it'll cost about $800 million.
800 million. So what do you expect the profit margin for NiSource to be in the next 3 years?
Well, without accounting for this tragedy, it will continue to
My
be.
My question is whether you will account for it, and whether the cost of this tragedy, the estimated 800 million, which I suspect will rise even further, will actually come out of your profit margin for the company.
We have approached this tragedy by bringing every resource available in without regard for the profit margin. Our first duty is to take care of our customers.
So what can we expect in your next quarterly report?
I don't know. It's too early to know that.
You're the CEO of the company, sir. You should know what shareholders should expect in their next report.
In the fourth quarter.
Do you expect to report a profit?
We're still in the fourth quarter, and I don't have clarity on what that'll look like at this point.
Well, if you took responsibility for this, you would have clarity. Because you would say right now that you will cover the $800 million and you will not see a profit at your company. Because otherwise, as Representative Tsongas suggested, it seems like you're going to take the money out of your customers to make the company whole, to make your shareholders whole. That's not responsibility. Mr. Bryant, one last question for you. Do you plan to resign?
At this point, Congressman, I do not. My job, my focus, my effort every day is the restoration of service to our customers.
So do you think you're the best qualified person to do that?
I think I am the best qualified person to do
Well,
that.
Mr. Bryant, I beg to differ. Based on your response that evening, when it took 5 hours to notify your customers that there was a problem, it's hard for me to imagine that you're the best person to take responsibility of this company. And I suggest you resign.
So now we're going to move to a second round of questions. Any of the members who have questions will be recognized for that purpose. Going to move down to PHMSA, which is our Federal Pipeline Safety Agency, which has responsibility for issuing regulations to ensure that communities in Merrimack Valley and communities all across the United States are safe. But unfortunately, our Pipeline Safety Agency has failed to do its job when it comes to natural gas pipelines. Federal rules contain critical safety gaps. This agency often takes many years to issue required regulations, dragging its feet while our communities remain in danger. The agency is the poster child for an agency which has been captured by the industry which it is supposed to regulate. Rather than being a watchdog, PHMSA has become a lapdog for this industry in discharging its responsibility to make sure that pipelines are safe in Merrimack Valley, but that pipelines are safe in every community across the country. Mr. Roberti, you say in your testimony, the onus of maintaining a safe pipeline system is on the companies that own and operate the system. That is a shocking statement, Mr. Roperty. That is like saying it is the responsibility of the fox to make sure that the hen house is safe. The onus, Mr. Roberti, is on your agency to ensure that the pipeline companies are operating safely, but your agency has abdicated that responsibility to the industry which it regulates. You leave it to the individual companies to determine whether or not they are going to put safety measures in place. So here we have a situation where 4 years ago, Columbia Gas just decided that they wouldn't have someone there on duty in Lawrence to be able to respond immediately. And that then created a huge time gap, which then allowed for this accident to occur where it perhaps could have been stopped right at the beginning. So let me turn to you, Mr. Krupowicz. Talk about PHMSA. Talk about their delegation of responsibility down to the company level, and what needs to happen in order to make sure that we in Congress take action, which is necessary, and that there is a uniform set of guidelines which are put in place that are mandatory to be abided by, so it's not left in the discretion of Columbia Gas or any other company to determine whether or not safety standards, which will cost money, are put in place. Mr. Krupowicz.
I'd say, first of all, technically, PHMSA has excellent technical people. I don't want to take that away from them. I interact with them all the time. The biggest problem I've observed in the last 20 years is the movement away from prescriptive regulation that has certain things that they must do.
Can you pull in the microphone, Mr. Krupowicz?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought my voice would carry. The biggest problem I see is the shift away from prescriptive, where there were certain things the operators must do that PHMSA could get in and say, you're doing this or you're not doing this, to what we call the more risk-based performance movements. And the performance gives a lot of wiggle room, and it's tough for a regulator to enforce. That's probably the biggest frustration. The second one I'd see, an example would be the integrity management regulations for gas transmission intrastate pipelines, as well as intrastate pipelines. We started with the performance. We agreed to go with performance-based. We'd rather have had a little more prescriptive. We said it's the first time we're going to do this. Okay, you've talked us into performance-based, and that has not been very successful.
So you say that the standard which is applied right now is inadequate. There should be a more prescriptive, a more detailed set of regulations put on the books to make sure that no company, no natural gas company in the United States is in any way questioning what the standard should be. And that if they violate it, they're going to pay a penalty. That the federal agency is going to come down on them for not abiding by what the national standard is for safety. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and especially if you want to rank in terms of where you want to put your effort in getting back towards the prescriptive regulations. Okay, you can have a discussion.
So we don't, in other words, we don't let nuclear power plant operators, we don't let the Seabrook nuclear power plant or the Pilgrim nuclear power plant determine what the level of safety is at a nuclear power plant. There are federal regulations that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission puts on the books and then implements. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're saying that the same thing should be true for PHMSA, and it is not today.
That's correct. Shift them back. They're capable of doing that. And it's a major shift.
It's a common sense shift. The people up here don't want to live questioning whether or not there are safety standards for the Seabrook nuclear power plant. They don't want to wonder whether or not it's just left up to a single unqualified engineer to determine what happens in a particular situation. They want to make sure that their families are safe. They want to make sure that there is a plan in place that has been put together by the top people in the United States to ensure that there is, in fact, protection which is put on the books. Chairman Zumwalt, do you agree with that?
Well, generally, I do believe that the idea of performance-based standards is acceptable. The trick is, how do you enforce the performance-based standards?
And if I may, because we talked about the $2 million fine on an $800 million accident, and I think that's conservative because the $800 million is what the insurance covers. There could be a much higher number ultimately, which is in fact imposed upon the citizens of Merrimack Valley, and this $2 million fine just seems absolutely pathetic as a discouragement. So the real safety standards are adopted. Mr. Secretary Beaton, what is the state looking at in terms of imposition of fines upon this company?
Sorry, Senator, there was a noise. Did you say relative to the fines? Primarily up to this moment in time, our sole focus has been on the restoration of and the stabilization of the situation and the restoration as close as best we can to back to normal here in the Merrimack Valley. We have an ongoing investigation at the Department of Public Utilities that will ultimately take us to that answer. I wouldn't want to put the cart before the horse and predetermine the outcome of that, so I think that is yet to be determined, but I'm sure we will most certainly be looking into that. It's too early to say what that would look like at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, after the disaster in the Merrimack Valley, you committed to replacing over 50 miles of pipeline, replacing all in-home gas appliances, and providing temporary appliance, heating, and housing sources for residents. You set the timeline yourself for this, Mr. Bryant. And what was the date that all that was to be done by?
The original date that we committed to was November 19th.
November 19th. And did you make that date?
We did not. Senator.
So now you have another date that you have set. And what's that date?
No later than December 16th.
December 16th. And can you guarantee that no family will have to wait beyond December 16th in order to return to their home, that they'll have full service by then?
Everything that I see, what we have accomplished to date, up to and including yesterday, indicates to me that we will beat that date.
So is that a guarantee?
Senator, for me to guarantee would suggest that we're in control of everything in life.
Let me stop you right there. You are in control. You are the guys who have all of the information. You're the ones who have the money. You're the ones who have the resources. You're the ones who determine how many people you hire and who you hire and how you go about this. And you're the ones who set the date. Mayor Rivera didn't set the date. Senator Markey didn't set the date. I didn't set the date. You said it. You said we could meet this. Now, you've already proven you're not very good at this because you've already missed by a month. All I want to know is, can you really tell the folks here who don't get to live in their houses, who don't have hot water, who can't cook, who don't have heat, can you tell them for sure that the date you've picked is a real date, and on December 16th, they can all plan to move back home?
I apologize for the comment about not being in control. All I meant was that there are customers who are making their own arrangements, and their own arrangements to put heat and hot water in their home may not be fulfilled perhaps by their own desire.
So anyone who's trying to do it on their own, I get that. But for everyone that you're picking up, which is everyone, if they trust you to do this, you'll have everyone back in their homes on December 16th.
Yes, Senator, we will have everybody back in their homes by December 16th.
By December 16th. Okay, and that's guaranteed.
Senator, that's my best statement. We will have people back in their homes before December.
That's guaranteed. Okay. So look, let me ask you a question about how we got to this mess to begin with when people thought they'd be back in on October 17th, or November 17th. People need heat, and I understand this. We just had the coldest Thanksgiving in 80 years, and you said what you do is you put space heaters in for everybody. That would get people back into their homes quickly, be able to get heat. You purchased 24,000 space heaters to provide to residents. So Senator Markey and I asked for some more details about the risk assessments you conducted before distributing these appliances and whether you'd chosen the safest possible option. So I just want to unpack a little how we got to where we are now. In your response, you acknowledged that about, quote, 90% of homes do not meet the recommended electrical configuration for space heaters. When you announced the plan to provide space heaters, did you know that almost none of the homes in the region could handle them?
No, we did not. One of the most difficult things in this process was learning the assessment of what we were facing. And our intent was to give every customer possible a space heater.
Did you not take any input from the local fire chiefs on this when you put together your plan to buy 24,000 space heaters and distribute them? The fire chiefs didn't talk to you about it, or you didn't talk to the fire chiefs about this?
What we relied on with the fire chiefs is the determination of what electrical requirements in the home would be appropriate to put in a space heater.
So when did you realize that you had a problem doing this with space heaters and consider making alternative housing and heating options available?
As we began to intensively do the house-by-house assessments.
So how deep were you into this before you realized, I mean, I can do the math here, that 90% of these homes, you're not going to be able to fix this problem with space heaters. So how far did you get in this before you started making alternative arrangements?
So we were working to make alternative housing arrangements immediately at the same time that we were looking to put space heaters into homes. We came to the conclusion that some customers may have wanted alternate housing and some customers may have wanted to stay in their homes. So we worked on two paths.
So I'm just having trouble putting this together. So your workers had trouble bringing housing up to code. You said you give everyone space heaters, then you realize the houses can't handle them, so you're gonna bring in electricians and you're gonna bring the houses up to code. So why did it take 13 days from the day that you announced the November 19th deadline, you announced that on October 9th, to October 22nd before you announced the delayed date for restoration?
Generally, we made the announcement about the delayed date for restoration once we made the determination that it would take us longer than we originally expected in most houses to be able to mitigate, to allow the house to become ready for natural gas.
And so you're saying that you didn't realize that you were going to blow your deadline until October 22nd? That's when you made the announcement?
Senator, when we made the announcement is when we came to the firm conclusion that we were not going to make that date.
You didn't make it before then. You didn't make it back sometime around October 9th when you're in the houses going house by house and finding out that 90% don't have the power structure to do this?
I'm sorry, Senator, the electric space heater issue really didn't play into the issue. It was really a case of our making a determination of what it would take to be able to turn natural gas service back on in a home.
Okay, and so now you've got the appliances issue though, whether or not you've got the appliances in, right, new appliances? Because you've finished the main part of the pipeline.
Certainly, Senator, we completed the natural gas distribution build out earlier than expected, but the what we call house ready to determine the work necessary to be able to turn the gas back on. It turned out to be much more labor intensive than we originally estimated.
Okay, so here's the problem I've got, and I'm just trying to work through this. It starts with where Congressman Moulton started, and that is, why did it take 5 hours in order to tell customers that there was a problem? I mean, you could see much more information on the news than you could get from the company that was responsible both for the explosion and for the safety of every single resident in the region. Now I'm going to the next part and saying you announced a deadline by which you'd have everyone back in their homes. You gathered more information as you went along. You waited until late in that process. Now you've announced a new deadline. And I'm asking the question, in effect, how much confidence can you have in the new deadline? Part of the question is, are you taking the information as it comes? And I want to ask one more related to this. On my way in, I met outside with the National Grid workers, trained workers who are ready to go, who are willing to help, who want to help, and most of them idle for the last 2.5 months. You know, you have a mutual aid pact with National Grid. You could have put their workers to work if they had been back at work at National Grid. So let me ask you, have you urged National Grid to reach an agreement with its workers so that you could call on mutual aid and get those people to work here in Lawrence and Andover and North Andover?
I have not had such a conversation with National Grid.
Why not?
Simply because I believe that those employees could have worked for our contractors and helped in the house mitigation.
So you didn't think it was important to do it through National Grid. You said you had another way to hire all those employees. Is that right? So you didn't ask National Grid to do this? So have you hired those National Grid employees through contractors indirectly or directly?
Senator, I don't know how many National Grid workers worked for our contractors. I don't have any way of knowing that specifically.
So, I guess, here's the problem. We talked about a culture of inattention to safety, putting profits ahead of safety that led to the explosion. Now the people here are trying to deal with the impact of that, with the aftermath. Some families will never be made whole. A family that's lost a son, people who've been injured, people who've been moved out of their houses, little children who can't go to their neighborhood schools, elderly people whose lives have been disrupted. But at a minimum, what we're asking for is some accountability in the recovery efforts. And that means the one thing you ought to be able to do, you have all the information, you are a very wealthy company. You could bring resources to bear, you could put a timeline out, and you could get these people back in their homes. And what we're hearing is that there's more information, you don't know who's been hired, you don't know if there are other people who would have been available, but somehow it all turned out to be a bigger project than you had in mind back when you blew up a bunch of people's houses, and that you're still not on top of this, and that people can't count on getting back in their homes. And is there anything you can say that's going to give people some confidence that they really are going to be there before Christmas?
Senator, I will say that. They will be there before Christmas.
All of them?
Senator, all of them that we can complete. Again, if a customer makes the determination that they don't
Not all of them that we can complete. What they want to hear is that they're all going to be completed.
Senator, will be effectively completed with all customers in their homes before Christmas.
All right, we're going to hold you to it.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
may I just, before I do this, just to follow up, I ask unanimous consent to submit into the record testimony from United Steelworker Local 12003, President Joe Carolo, and testimony from United Steelworker Local 12012, President John Bonapani, describing their concerns about Massachusetts pipeline safety. Without objection, their testimony will be included in the record. I apologize, Senator Hess.
It's all good. I want to go back to the NTSB report and the timeline of this tragedy. And maybe, Mr. Kuprowicz, I can start with you. The Monitoring Center for Columbia Gas received an alert at 4:04 p.m. and 4:05 p.m. that there was overpressurization, according to the NTSB report. What technology exists, if any, that would have allowed the control center to shut down the regulator remotely?
Well, they'd have to implement and go to the extreme. Most gas distribution systems do not have automated or remote control shutoff valves across their gridded gas networks. And so when I hear that's kind of where they're heading, well, that's a good thing, but it's kind of a different thing. And so that's good. And that would have given them the ability to say, I'm monitoring the pressure at this point, I'm seeing overpressure, my control center now has the ability to close that. Now, there's risk in doing that, okay? But that would give the control center the option of doing that, because most distribution systems do not have the ability, while they may have remote monitoring, they don't have highly sophisticated remote controlling of gas distribution systems. It's highly unusual.
So it's unusual to have, but the technology exists to do it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, it's unusual for a gas company to have, but the technology exists to do it.
That's correct. They could do it. It's just money.
It took about, as I read the report, it took about 26 minutes from the first alarm to the actual closure of the critical regulator. And that's a long time.
In the industry, yes, but it's pretty typical for systems that have to be manually closed.
Well, and that's really what I'm trying to get at here. If systems have to be manually closed and it takes somebody calling people in the field and then them going out and closing the regulators, during that 26 minutes, catastrophe can occur.
That's
and
right.
It did. It did. Okay. Mr. Roberti, I want to go back to what I referenced earlier. Your agency, PHMSA, is responsible for developing and enforcing regulations for the safe operation of our country's 2.6 million miles of pipelines. Your agency, though, doesn't have a great track record. So it is very clear that there are going to be recommendations of new safety regulations that come out of this tragedy, with the hope that we will never see another tragedy like this one. But it is hard, given your agency's track record, to believe that you are really going to initiate the implementation of these regulations. It seems that you all have no regard for timeliness when it comes to implementing congressional mandates and recommendations from the NTSB, from the GAO, or the Inspector General's office. According to a 2016 GAO report, PHMSA has not implemented 1/3 of its mandates. It has missed numerous deadlines, and 25% of its mandates remain completely unimplemented, including 8 pipeline recommendations relating to safety. The numbers are from 2016, so the first question is, have you made progress since 2016?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. The current PHMSA leadership is working tirelessly to get these unfinished mandates out. We have made some success. The Administrative Procedures Act is a law that we have to adhere to. There are executive orders and OMB regulations, and I can tell you that the PHMSA leadership, we walk the hallways, and daily, this is what we know we're tasked with this. We have congressional mandates, and we are doing everything we can to get them done as soon as possible.
You are not the only federal agency to have to deal with the administrative rules and acts. I would urge you, we have a gymnasium full of people and a much larger community full of people whose lives have been forever changed by this tragedy. And they are looking now to make sure that we do more than rely on the private sector to regulate itself. They are looking to their state and federal governments to step up and make sure that we implement the rules that we have, and if we change some rules and implement some new ones to make sure this never happens again, that PHMSA will be right out there. And I would like your agency's guarantee that you will be initiating and pushing in ways that you haven't in the past, asking Congress, asking the administration for more resources if you need them. But this should not be an agency that is this woefully behind in implementing critical safety mandates that protect the lives and the economy of this country. Is that fair?
That's a fair statement, and we commit to meeting the congressional mandates and waiting for the conclusion of these investigations so that we have a full and complete record on which to move, whether or not the minimum standards need to be changed. As you know, we set the minimum standards. States can go above and beyond. It's actually not a pure delegation. Congress granted, or the authority over interstate systems has been reserved to the states. So it's a little bit more complex.
I do understand that, and as a former governor, I am always appreciative of having that kind of partnership, right? But what states are also looking to the NTSB and to PHMSA for is leadership and coordination, and frankly, it would be helpful to the point I made earlier to the chairman, given that state legislatures will be reconvening in most states in this country next month. I would really highly recommend that you take what you can share with state governments now from this investigation, and you get to work on coordinating with them so that, to the degree there are state laws and regulations that need to be changed, our states have the opportunity to get on the ball and do that. And they're looking to you all for leadership and coordination to do that. Will you commit to me and this panel and to the people here that you will initiate that kind of coordination and communication?
Yes, Senator, it's underway, and we commit to doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Congresswoman Saunders.
Thank you. It seems to me much of the discussion is begs the issue of the company's anticipation that such a terrible disaster might happen. We are focused very much on what caused it, how to put in place measures that prevent it from happening ever again, but also being mindful that we have to plan in the event that they do happen. And it seems to me much of our experience here in the Merrimack Valley and much of the questioning is eliciting answers that show you really did not anticipate a disaster like this ever taking place. So my question, Mr. Hamrock, is how does your company plan for worst case scenario disasters? Was there a plan in place that you could immediately turn to and implement?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We do, in fact, have extensive emergency response and crisis response plans in place that we train on, drill on, run tabletops. We run through scenarios on a very frequent basis. When this happened, I was notified within 18 minutes of the initial alarm, immediately knew something terrible had happened and activated our corporate crisis response protocols, which included and entailed bringing support to the Columbia Gas of Massachusetts team, dispatched senior lieutenants who were on the ground here within hours, here that evening from other parts of our system. I was on the ground the very next day and have spent the vast majority of the time here. The local operating company, Columbia Gas of Massachusetts, also has emergency response planning for such a scenario. This clearly was an extreme scenario. A lot we can learn from this, a lot we are learning from this. We're committed to working with the NTSB. One of the areas of their investigation looks at emergency response. We're fully cooperating with that, and will in fact take back all lessons and actions that we can from this terrible tragedy.
So as you're looking at your response, and clearly there were many shortcomings in it, what would you identify at this point as some of the clear takeaways from it, things you really have to deal with?
As Mr. Bryant said earlier, communications is an area that we clearly have lessons that we've learned and will continue to learn. It's an area that requires additional focus for us. We are focused on that. And then I would commend the administration, the Baker administration, for implementing SMS on a statewide basis, because I believe that framework will help not only us here in Massachusetts, but ultimately the entire industry have a more effective overlay of risk analysis and the ability to do more assessment of risk of these kinds of situations and be better prepared in the event they could happen.
So is your disaster plan a written plan? Is it something somebody could take a look at to be sure that it's adequate? Where does it exist?
Our emergency plan is in fact a written plan. It's drilled and it's shared with all of our stakeholders. We work with fire departments on emergency response drills. We work with emergency responders. We built a training center here in Massachusetts where we do that kind of training and drilling. Very committed to that, and recognize there are things in this tragedy that we need to learn from that didn't quite meet the standard.
So it clearly needs some work. Mr. Roberti, I have a question for you. As part of your regulatory oversight, do you require pipeline companies to have a disaster response plan in place that you can review and determine whether it's adequate or not?
So, under federal regulations, for any incident, including a pressure alarm going off, a leak, a fire, or a call, an emergency call, companies have to respond promptly and effectively. That's in the regulations.
And
So
how do you describe promptly? How is that determined?
Well, I can tell you it's not 3 hours and 20 minutes to shut off the regulator stations. It has to be, as Mr. Kukovic said, that each pipeline system is different. In order to physically go out and shut off valves, it will require different logistical actions. There is no set time frame, but typically 30 minutes is a typical response time for an operator to respond to a call for a leak or to respond to a situation like this.
And that's because there are people in place who've been designated to take those actions.
Personnel and resources have to be readily deployable to respond to an incident like this.
So given the fact that this took so much longer, what would you say about that?
Well, I don't want to prejudge. This is, again, I said that the jurisdiction to review compliance is within compliance with federal and state regulations is with the state of Massachusetts. That investigation has to complete. We fully expect the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, when it completes its investigation, to make determinations about the company's compliance with existing federal regulations and state regulations, to the extent Massachusetts has regulations that exceed the minimum.
All right, well, thank you so much, because I know we've dealt in Washington with other disasters in which it was clear there were no disaster response plans in place, and we watched these disasters unfold, as we did here, in a way that caused much more damage than ever should have been the case. And so as lawmakers, we need to look at whether or not we need to require by law something more particular that reassures the public that the company is being held to the highest of standards. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Bolton.
Yes, I'd like to talk to Secretary Beaton. How would you describe the current state of our gas pipeline infrastructure in Massachusetts, Mr. Secretary?
I think given the nature and the history of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the fact is we have one of the oldest networks of natural gas distribution in the nation. I think we see that in the Northeast in particular, and our early industrialized parts of the country. But we do have a plan in place called our GSEP plan. That is a plan submitted by the public utilities of the replacement of that older pipeline to be modernized by more modern infrastructure.
And how long will that plan take to implement?
Well, when they were originally filed, the companies ranged between 20 and 25 years, with one exception of 11. But for the most part, I think we're in year 5. They were 20-year plans.
So 20-year plans. So in the interim, we need to make sure that another tragedy like this doesn't occur.
And it seems to me that part of the way we do that is through inspections, and your office is responsible for inspections of our gas pipeline system. Is that correct, Mr. Secretary?
Yes.
And do you take responsibility for the safety of our pipeline system since you are in charge of inspections?
Yes.
Do you believe that the current inspection and regulatory system in the state is adequate?
I believe it serves a function. I believe it serves its intended function, is what I meant to say. Are there improvements that we can make to it? Certainly, and I think that is the reason for us calling on an independent evaluator.
Okay, so Mr. Secretary, could you just, I'm not sure what serves its function means exactly. Do you think the system is adequate? The current system? The current inspection system?
To accomplish what it is intended to accomplish, yes. Are there opportunities?
And what is it, Mr. Secretary, what is it intended to accomplish?
To oversee compliance and enforcement of federal and state standards.
What about the safety of the citizens of the Commonwealth? Isn't that fundamentally what it's supposed to accomplish?
If that is the sole tool that is going to solve all the answers to accomplish that, then yes, but I think by inspection alone, we are not going to eliminate all risk associated with natural gas.
Okay, I understand we can't eliminate all risk, but you said you do take responsibility for the safety of the citizens of the Commonwealth.
I believe I was asked a different question, but I think it is our role to put policies, procedures, and enforcement and compliance in place that protects the Commonwealth citizens, yes.
Okay, so there are 21,000 miles of pipeline currently in Massachusetts. Can you say with confidence that we are safe from another accident like this occurring in the future, at least before the 20-year timeline for the replacement of these pipelines?
Is the definition of safe a guarantee that something would never ever happen again?
You can answer that as you like. I'm just asking, do you have confidence that an explosion like this will not occur again?
I think we're going to do everything in our power to make sure, and I think we've taken great action. I don't think anyone sitting at this table could guarantee nothing could happen. There's too many scenarios that I think it makes that guarantee impossible.
Let's just talk about the inspectors for a second. According to the Boston Globe, just prior to the explosions, federal pipeline regulators audited the state's utility commission and raised concerns about attrition among the agency's inspectors. Data from the state comptroller show 8 DPU inspectors have retired in the past 3 years, including 4 since March. 6 engineers were certified to conduct pipeline inspections at the time of the most recent federal audit, but 1 was out on medical leave, another was working on desk-bound duties due to medical issues, and 2 were working as supervisors. So at the time, the state had just 2 engineers doing field inspections of pipeline work. Do you think that is adequate?
No.
Just to put this in perspective for folks, there are 21,000 miles of pipeline in Massachusetts. That means that with 2 inspectors in the field, each is responsible for 10,500 miles of pipeline. If you had a pipeline going from here to San Francisco, and from San Francisco to Houston, and then from Houston back here, that wouldn't be 10,500 miles. In fact, you could then go all the way to San Francisco again, and that wouldn't be 10,500 miles. That's the responsibility of 1 inspector. That doesn't seem even close to adequate.
Well, could I bring some clarification to that?
Yes, Mr. Secretary, please.
Yes, thank you. So those numbers aren't entirely accurate. Currently, we have 6 certified inspectors, 2 professional engineers on their way for on the pathway for inspection, 3 new hires, 2 additional postings, and a divisional inspector. You pointed out that there is high turnover. This is a national challenge that every state faces, especially in a good economy. When higher paying private sector jobs, you can go in, get the training with the state and through the federal government, and then be ripe for purchase in the private sector. And it is a challenge all of our states face. I will say, in 2013, we had 8 inspectors. It reached a peak of 12.5. In 2017, we had 10. In 2013, 716 inspections were completed. In 2017, 1,177. inspections were performed. There has been a trajectory of trending in the right direction of both the number of inspections. We did hit one of those cycles and one of those dips where we had a large transition out of inspectors. At that moment in time when the incident occurred, we have since taken the action to post new positions and will be at an all-time high of 14 inspectors once all the hires are made.
Okay, well, I hope we get to 14, but just to put it in perspective for folks again, through all the numbers you went through, it seems to me that in the past years, the highest you've ever reached is 12. Okay? Again, with 21,000 miles of pipeline in Massachusetts, that's like saying that each one of those inspectors is responsible for a pipeline that goes from here to Dallas. That doesn't strike me as adequate, Mr. Secretary. I have one more question. I'm over my time. At a time when the DPU had only 2 inspectors in the field, hundreds of locked out National Grid workers offered to assist in the recovery effort. However, it wasn't until a month later that these workers were actually deployed. Why did it take so long for this to happen?
There are a number of complexities there associated with it. We don't have the unilateral jurisdiction and authority to mandate that happen. The governor convened multiple meetings between the parties to try to negotiate and come to terms on this. We also worked very closely with all parties to try to get the workers to be able to work as quickly as possible. That took there were many conversations, and there was actually an effort by NiSource to put out a notice that any of the employees would be welcome. They would have to come through another contractor, given the nature of the contract dispute between the union and National Grid. There was an open door. There were some workers that were able to work on the site, but the expertise of those workers was the work that was in the ground, not the house-ready work that has been the challenge that we have talked about. And that work was way ahead of schedule. 43.3 miles and over 5,000, I think it was 5,086 service lines were placed in 29 days. So there was a short window of time where the expertise of those workers would have been able to fit into the puzzle of this extremely complicated restoration. But we did make every effort, and led by the governor actually initiating conversations and mediation talks to try to get the parties to sit down and negotiate and try to accelerate the opportunity to get those workers working as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. But the bottom line is it took a month for them to come online. And the bottom line right now is that we have enough inspectors for each one to be responsible for a pipeline from here to Dallas. And your goal is to add just 2 more. I think we need to significantly increase that goal. Thank you.
Thank you. So this panel has made it very clear that there are huge deficiencies in the regulatory system in our country, that there is a huge regulatory black hole that has been created where everyone can point a finger in another direction in order to avoid the responsibility of actually having put the real safety protections in place to guarantee that accidents like this don't happen. That's why we're having this here, to make sure it does not happen again. Mr. Hamrock, Mr. Bryant, at every step of the process, there was a chance for NiSource and Columbia to avoid this disaster. You could have had the correct maps of your system, but you did not. You could have made sure the meters and regulations group the brains of the pipeline system, reviewed all work plans, but you did not. You could have had a professional engineer sign off on plans, but you did not. You could have had automatic shutoff relief devices installed to prevent overpressurization, but you did not. You could have had someone on site at the regulator station to monitor operations, but you did not. Instead of choosing safety, you chose savings. Instead of choosing action, you chose to cut corners. And instead of choosing And instead of choosing to do things the right way, you chose the easy way every time, and the result was disaster. But because of the decisions that you made to cut corners, to never prioritize safety, you created a situation where there were ticking time bombs underneath every street and inside of every house and business. The deeper we dig into your company, the more frightening this has become. Your recklessness took a wrecking ball to the lives of residents in these communities. Columbia Gas has been making up its response to this disaster as it goes along. Its deadlines, its deadlines in November are now deadlines for December. But as Christmas is arriving, there are families all over Merrimack Valley who still doubt that they will be back in their homes. There are businesses who are still doubting that they will be open. And that's a legacy of your negligent activities in the days and weeks and months and years leading up to that disaster. And now, you're not even close to making it up to the people of Merrimack Valley. Not even close. We're not going away. We're going to be here with the people of Merrimack Valley to make sure that your company is made accountable, to make sure that there is a reckoning which NiSource and Columbia Gas has to suffer as a consequence of your negligence, of your taking the lowest common denominator as your standard for safety. The people in this room, they paid the price for that lowest common denominator. Their families paid the price. And we're going to make sure that this system is overhauled so that a real safety system is put in place, not just for Merrimack Valley, but for the whole country. We owe it to the people of this country, as the natural gas industry says that it wants to dramatically expand natural gas into every city, every town, every state in the United States. That's their goal. But we're going to make sure that safety is issue number one, that this lesson is not lost, that all of the answers which we have been receiving, which basically have been saying they don't know all of the details, that they're still learning, that they're still responding to the NTSB. That's all we really need to know about how little they had planned for this disaster. So you might be making it up as you're going along, but for the people of Merrimack Valley, their lives have been affected by that lack of attention, lack of concern, lack of safety. So this is the first hearing, but it's not the last. This is the beginning of accountability, the beginning of a process to ensure that our promise to the American people and to the people, on behalf of the people in Merrimack Valley, that this never happens again. So this completes the first panel, and we will be submitting questions in writing to you, and we would also expect prompt answers to those questions in detail to the committee. So this hearing is concluded, and we now invite the second panel up to begin their testimony. Thank you, sir. We're going to be working with you. Very closely. Yeah, we're good.
Don't worry. If it's better unplugged, I defer entirely. I don't know if I made a difference or not. I unplugged it to see if it did.
How are you? I've just been emailing your wife.
Oh, you have?
Well, but before we started, I said, we're all here. Really scary natural gas people behind me saying anarchist kind of things before we started.
Oh, really?
Very interesting. I was sitting in the fourth row, so they're in the fifth row, plus all the way back in. Anti-government, take down the government. I mean, we don't often hear that peninsula.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. They got drilled. They got really drilled up here.
I've never seen anything like it. I'm so glad I came.
I know. Ellen should have come.
Yeah, Ellen should have come. I don't know, but maybe she's doing things with Owen or just what.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I got to meet Ellen at 2 o'clock. We're doing a site walk out of the polluter lynch.
I know. Yeah, she's trying to get me to pick up Owen. I said I don't know how long I'm going to be here.
Wow.
It was interesting though.
Yes, I'm so glad I came.
I am too. Tell Ellen that she should have been here. I'm going to tell her the same thing. You don't get many chances at something to see something like this. You know.
I spent 3 years fighting Kinder Morgan. We all had to educate ourselves separately. But the level of research the delegation has done. Of course, their staff is doing
very. I was impressed by that.
Yes,
I agree.
3 hours and 20 minutes to notify to shut off the gas.
I don't have gas.
I don't have gas either, but I mean, 3 hours to shut it off. Can't you turn the fuel? But there was nobody there.
No one's home.
No. So I'm keeping you from doing that. So you got to see now.
I'm glad you said hello.
Oh, great.
Okay.
I was watching you earlier.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. See you on shortly.
Okay, great.
Cheerio.
All right, take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, the committee will come to order. The committee will come to order. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce, please take your seats. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Committee will come to order. Now I would like to welcome our next panel made up of leaders from the communities who have been hurt by this disaster. First, we have Lawrence Mayor Dan Rivera. Mayor Rivera has, in many ways, been the face of this issue, speaking for his constituents. He's been doing an outstanding job in ensuring that those voices are heard, and we thank him for his work. Also, he's joined by North Andover Town Manager Andrew Mailer and Andover Town Manager Andrew Flanagan, who have been representing their communities to make sure that their concerns are heard on a daily basis. And I am submitting joint testimony on behalf of both of the town managers into the record, and I thank them for providing their stories to the committee. We thank you all for being here, and we will begin with you, Mr. Mayor, and then I will introduce the other witnesses as their testimony is called for. So again, we welcome you, Mr. Mayor. And we thank you for everything that you've done for your community. And whenever you are ready, please begin your testimony. And if you could move that microphone in just a little bit.
How's that?
If you maybe lift it up a little bit. Good.
Good morning, senators, invited guests, and fellow affected citizens. I want to begin by thanking Senator Markey for advocating on our behalf of our communities to bring this hearing to Lawrence, an honorary Lawrence kid. It allows us all those affected to be present and included throughout the investigation process. The gas fires and explosions of September 13th and the days that followed were both a human tragedy and a human disaster. That tragedy continues despite the best efforts of Columbia Gas and the recovery effort. I never thought that I would have to ask people in my community and those in surrounding communities to evacuate the city, fearing for their lives. Asking them to abandon their homes, their businesses, their neighborhoods, because no one knew if it was safe for them to be there. Residents everywhere in the area evacuated out of sheer panic. We had to cut the electrical power to every domicile and business in South Lawrence, Andover, North Andover, in the middle of the night. What followed, the devastations of the fires and explosions, was loss of life, grave, unbearable injury to people, priceless loss of property and the regional economy. But worst of all, we lost the underlying security that the very thing most of us relied on to keep ourselves and our families warm in the coldest of New England winters could destroy our homes, our neighborhoods, our towns, and our very peace. We expected that the gas services that we pay good money for every month, that many families sacrifice to make those monthly payments, and that business owners base the core of their businesses on, would not put us in grave danger. However, that is exactly what happened. And during the heart of the disaster, I've said this before, Columbia Gas was the least informed and last to act. It is important to know that while we were trying to save lives and make heads or tails of the tragedy and disaster of those days, Columbia Gas was failing to manage the disaster in the same way they had failed to maintain their gas lines. I beat most of the upper echelon leadership to the scene that night after driving in Thursday night traffic from Boston. Those that have done that understand what I'm talking about. It was clear that the Columbia Gas engineers and Columbia Gas Massachusetts top leadership were afraid and lacked a clear path to deal with the disaster. They owned the pipe, they owned the gas in the pipe, they owned the customer relationships, that they failed to own this disaster. It failed so much so that Governor Baker had to call for a state of emergency and put a different utility company in charge. And we lost critical hours that first weekend getting people back in their homes because Columbia Gas refused to call for mutual aid, motivated by what appeared to many of us to be an unwillingness to bear the cost of that mutual aid. One person was dead, many were injured, and the core of 3 communities had been shaken. And it appeared to many of us that Columbia Gas didn't have an actual plan for dealing with a disaster of this magnitude, as if it had never crossed their mind that this could occur. And earlier today they said they did have one. I would love to see that. I'd love for them to put that up in a place, the plan that was in place prior to this event. These plans should be mandated across utilities, not just natural gas, for there to be a system failure and customer evacuation plan created and refreshed every 2 years. Ordinary people have plans to get out of their own homes in case of a fire. It's the least the utility could do to have a basic plan in place if they set your city on fire. It is cold outside today, and there is snow on the ground. People in our communities are still without heat and hot water. Some people are still in hotel rooms and RVs, and some are still cooking on hot plates. And most of the people in the affected areas, regardless if they were lit before Thanksgiving or not, let's just say they didn't have the Thanksgiving they wanted to due to this disaster. The recovery is a material effort, fixing things and systems so that life can happen. And in that sense, the recovery is an awful experience only made better every day for some who get their gas turned back on. I want to say thanks to Governor Baker, because of him we have Chief Recovery Officer Joe Albanese leading the recovery effort. 28-year veteran of former captain of the United States Navy Civil Engineer Corps, the Seabees. We're honored to have Joe leading our restoration efforts, and he enjoys our full support and appreciation for walking away from his own business to work on this recovery. Every day, he has done all he can to assist us to get Columbia Gas to live up to the responsibilities and get the work done. As I have lived it, the recovery has really been about 4 things. Fixing the pipe in the street and to the house to get gas to the house. Fixing the pipe and appliances in the house so they can turn the gas on. Making people whole as customers of Columbia Gas for their physical loss, for mental anguish and terrifying experiences that they had to endure, and that means financially. And 4, supporting those people throughout this time as they waited for the first 3 things to be completed. Columbia Gas did accomplish the work of fixing the pipe in the street ahead of schedule and without further disaster. For this, we are thankful. However, the rest of the work has been miserable. Anytime the recovery has had to deal with the plight and need of people, Columbia Gas has initially failed, only getting it right days and sometimes weeks after local and state officials have raised their pressure on them so much so that they had to relent. The plight of people and their suffering has been prolonged because of a broken claims process, a broken repair process, and a total lack of understanding on how to communicate with customers. Long before we had 250 houses lit in a day with gas, we had weeks of only 40 homes a day lit. For this, not only does Columbia Gas, but Gilbane Recovery Services bear responsibility and as such should be investigated. I want to repeat that. Gilbane Recovery Services also bears responsibilities for missing the initial date and should be investigated. Before we had 100 appliances delivered to homes on a day, we had days with none. And for almost a week, securing temporary housing was not only daunting, but nearly impossible. Customers were lied to about availability of hotels and RVs and consistently left in the dark on their claims process. All the while, hotel rooms and RVs sat empty, having to endure not 1, not 2, but as many as 5 assessments of their homes and appliances before one wrench was turned to fix their boilers or furnaces was a common experience of the affected communities. Many times people languished without answers to important questions about when they should stay home from work to accommodate the Columbia Gas and the Gilbane contractors, and when they could expect answers regarding the claims. All the while, people were sleeping in cold beds and cooking on hot plates and taking cold showers. Other families huddled in RVs and faraway hotel rooms waiting for their homes to be fixed. I'm not sure what would have happened to our communities if not for the firefighters of the Lawrence, Andover, North Andover fire departments and the over 1,000 firefighters that came in support of them, including the State Fire Marshal's office. The effect of this disaster was controlled only by the professional posture and response of the Lawrence, Andover, North Andover police departments and the over 1,100 police officers from across the Commonwealth and the state police. All the municipal employees that put down their city and town bureaucracies and became an army of first responders, aid and humanitarian workers. From the city councilors and selectmen to the library directors, from the state representatives, to the teachers and the staff of our public schools, many of them affected themselves. The governor and his staff and cabinet who seamlessly rolled up their sleeves and became an active, important part of these efforts. The state legislature, the federal delegation, both of you have made us feel that our plight was the most important business before the Commonwealth. Town Manager Mailer and Flanagan and I, as well as the affected across the communities, can never thank them all enough for their actions. I must say that I have never been more proud to be associated with this group of people in my life. They all showed up the spirit of government and its power to do good. I want to be sure to say the rank and file of Columbia Gas workers and zone captains and the workers who fixed the pipe in the street all were shining spots in this ordeal. Zone captains became a symbol of the good Columbia Gas could do if it got its stuff together. The recovery in the personal and communal sense for every person affected is going to take some time, not measured in days or weeks. I'm not sure when we will remove from our memories the darkness, the fire, the cold nights, the cold showers, the evacuations, and the loss of such a young life. So in the end, we will need help from state and federal officials and government to pave our roads, to fix our infrastructure, to pay for economic development, basic help for us to get off the mat after being knocked down by Columbia Gas. But what we all expect from you, what we ask of you, is to do what is at the core of why we have governments, and that is to protect us and to ensure this can't and won't happen again. In this one incident, Columbia Gas has showed they could not provide safely the service they promised everyone. This failure alone should cause that you take that privilege of running a gas company away from them and break that company apart. I'm not sure how you do it, revoke their licenses, make them sell their business to someone else. It doesn't matter how you do it. But after they have met their financial obligations, not only to the individuals and the businesses and to the municipalities, Columbia Gas should cease to exist. No second chances. Like everyone knows, life was taken and multiple homes no longer exist and our lives, livelihood, and our peace has forever been altered, so should Columbia Gas no longer exist. A disbanded Columbia Gas that no longer exists will send a strong message and motivate to others to do better around safety. That is what justice for everyone affected by this disaster would look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your great work. And next, we're going to hear from Tina Messina. Tina is a leader in the small business community in North Andover. We thank you for coming here and representing all of those businesses who want to have answers as to what happened and how soon they can go back to work. So we thank you, and whenever you're ready, please begin.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tina Messina, and I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to discuss the impact on September 13th gas explosion has had on the business community.
Could you move that microphone just over in front of you, just a little
Closer?
bit? Yes, beautiful.
Closer. After the initial shock of the event, the community needed to understand the scope of the problem. Information on the details came slowly as we learned what happened and who was affected by this event. By the following Sunday, I found myself hitting the trifecta. I was impacted as a landlord with 2 retail properties, a 3-unit strip mall, a 23-unit shopping center, a business owner of a retail wine store, and my home were all in the affected area. We learned that there could be over 40 miles of gas line that needed to be replaced, and our gas equipment had been compromised. Upon learning this information, we didn't know if we were looking at months or years to get back our gas service. That Monday, I began receiving many phone calls from my tenants. While some tenants could operate without gas, others, such as the restaurants, were shut down. Our restaurant tenants found themselves with no revenue stream, and they were facing loss of help. Shama Grill, a 164-seat restaurant, began to receive cancellation of future events as he could not give these clients any assurances that he would have a functional facility. During that first week after the explosion, finding a solution to our problems was difficult, as we needed to wait on state and local officials to give us direction. Information was scarce and frustration set in. As property owners, we began to explore our options to provide alternatives to heat our buildings. It was September, and we figured that we had 3 months before the cold weather was upon us, and we knew that if we didn't have heat, we could not provide a working sprinkler system, and we would have to shut down the buildings. It was an unthinkable scenario. We immediately began to look into alternative fuel sources such as LP tanks, but quickly found we weren't the first to be making those phone calls. It became clear there were many of us, businesses as well as homeowners, fighting for the same limited resources. We were also encountering state regulations and large costs for these solutions, making it very difficult to determine what to do. We needed answers. It wasn't until the following Friday that we learned that the recovery process was going to take approximately 2 months, and businesses were going to be addressed first. While we were all relieved to hear of the short timeline, understanding the execution of the recovery plan was unknown. During this planning stage, many of us were experiencing loss of revenue, whether you were able to open your business or not. People stayed away from the area, and many people didn't know that businesses were open. As the recovery plan unfolded, it became apparent we all needed to individually manage the process of getting our gas turned back on. This became a full-time job for some of us. Understanding what equipment needed to be fixed versus replaced was not a simple yes or no answer. Managing that process with Columbia was challenging, as parameters and information changed daily. You would be told what to do one day, and then the next day you would have a new crew telling you something different. It was important to stay on top of the situation to ensure that your business and/or building would get relit. Once the gas-ready plan was deployed, we were hit with another wave of disruption. While we all understood replacing 48 miles of gas line was a monumental task, we did not understand the impact it would have on the infrastructure surrounding our businesses. Roads were shut down and dug up, while traffic was redirected, making it time-consuming and difficult for people to get to our businesses. For more than 5 days, the only way to get in and out of our 23-unit shopping center was through the CVS drive-thru. As it became difficult to get to these affected areas, many people were told not to go to these areas via social media. People were posting, "What a mess. Took me 40 minutes to go a half mile. Don't go there if you don't have to." Frustrations amongst patrons began to set in, and they stayed away. I experienced this with the Wine Connection, as our year-over-year sales were down from the previous time last year, and I expect other businesses experienced the same. Also during this time, it became evident that people were living out of the area, whether by choice or the need to relocate due to their living conditions. Our regular customers were not around to shop for our goods and services. As someone whose personal home was affected, I understood the difficulties of living without heat, hot water, and cooking capabilities. Now that we are entering our 3rd month into the recovery, concerns turn to the holiday season. This is a critical time for retailers and hospitality businesses, and we wonder, how will we fare through this season? Do customers know we're open? Will they return to our businesses, or have they adopted new locations for shopping for goods and services? When will residents be able to return to their homes and patronize our business? In a booming economy, these are unsettling questions we're about to face. In conclusion, I'd just like to say to the committee that the people of Merrimack Valley are resilient, and while we're still dealing with these challenges to recover from this disaster, we look forward to the days when we can get back to normal. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your testimony. And next we are going to hear from Andover Fire Chief Michael Mansfield, and I am also going to submit to the record testimony on behalf of Lawrence Fire Chief Brian Moriarty, North Andover Fire Chief William McCarthy. Also with us are Andover Police Chief Patrick Keefe, Lawrence Police Chief Roy Basque, and North Andover Police Chief Charles Gray. We thank each and every one of you and all of the people who worked under you, who responded so valiantly on that first day and on all of the ensuing days. We are in your debt. We are in your debt every day, but that was an especially trying time, and we just want to mindful that on that day and on every day you run towards the flames as everyone else is running away from the flames. And on a day like today, I think it's appreciated more than ever. So thank you. And now Chief Mansfield, speaking on behalf of all of the brave men and women who worked up in Merrimack Valley to respond to that crisis. We welcome your testimony.
Senator Markey, thank you very much. Senator Warren, Representative Songus, Representative Moulton. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today representing those men and women of the fire service who responded to the catastrophic natural gas incident that occurred at approximately 4:18 on September 13th, 2018. This event has been identified by some as the worst natural gas disaster to ever occur in the history of the United States, if not the world. I must state that the time afforded to me to speak today will not even scratch the surface with regards to the specifics of this event or the challenges we have been confronted with and are still confronted with as we navigate through the recovery phase of this operation.
Chief, could I ask you just to move the microphone in a little closer? Okay, beautiful.
Certainly.
Thank you.
The events that led up to the disaster would have never occurred if there were technological stopgap measures on the pipeline in place by Columbia Gas. Those measures would have prevented what has been reported to be up to 74 pounds of pressure introduced into the gas line that took well over 1 hour by Columbia Gas employees and or subcontractors to shut down and purge. To date, it remains incomprehensible that Columbia Gas, which is a subsidiary of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate known as NiSource, is involved in an industry that is so dangerous to our communities, but had no ability to stop the flow of natural gas to its infrastructure that supplies the three communities of Lawrence, North Andover, and Andover. The fire service in all three communities usually rely heavily upon one another to assist in the mitigation of any type of emergency incident when they occur. When this incident, all three fire departments were found themselves competing for the same resources to assist in the emergency response, which included a total of 141 fires, 5 building explosions, unfortunately 1 death, and I want to express my sincere condolences to the Rondon family for your loss, 3 civilians seriously injured, and 7 firefighter injuries. 911 calls for assistance at the initial point of the incident were overwhelmed all available fire rescue resources in the 3 affected communities within minutes. All off-duty fire rescue personnel were requested to report back into work. 150 of those off-duty firefighters answered the call from the 3 communities immediately. The 911 telecommunicators in the community's dispatch centers were overwhelmed immediately by the deluge of calls from the affected residents. In the first 8 hours after the initial natural gas line overpressurization occurred, the Lawrence, North Andover, and mutual aid assets responded to over 375 calls for assistance. Firefighter safety was drastically minimized during the height of this incident as a result of the immediate lack of available resources. There are many instances on record where only one piece of apparatus with only 3 firefighters on board responded to a full-blown building fire. A normal initial response to these types of incidents would include up to 3 engines, an aerial ladder, command staff, and rescues, totaling upwards between 15 to 17, quite possibly 20 firefighters. There were many reports of fire personnel passing by structure fires as they responded to a structure fire at an address they had been originally dispatched to. There are also many reports of firefighters exiting homes after extinguishing a fire and being met by frantic neighbors telling them that their home was also on fire. Mutual aid was immediately requested to respond to all affected communities as well. That system was overwhelmed to a point that a request to the state of Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency was made to activate the statewide fire mobilization plan, which allowed for several task forces of personnel, engine and ladder companies, and ambulances to respond to assist with the disaster. The fire mobilization plan brought in the following additional personnel and equipment assets from as far away as York, Maine, Nashua, New Hampshire, and communities as far away as Western Massachusetts. We had a total of 18 additional engine companies, 6 additional ladder companies, 9 additional chief officers, 56 additional ambulances, and 80 additional fire suppression personnel per 12-hour operational period were involved. These additional assets were rotated every 12 hours to ensure firefighter safety was paramount, and those asset numbers were maintained until Monday, September 17, 2018. Many Commonwealth of Massachusetts and federal agencies assisted with the initial responses, investigations, mitigations, and are still operating as part of the recovery phase of the operation, such as the Massachusetts Department of Fire Services, the Fire Marshal's Office, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, the National Transportation Safety Board with their investigation, Federal Bureau of Investigations, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency as well. There are many lessons to be learned by this event. We within the fire service are willing to work with those at the state and federal level to assist in the writing of additional legislation to further regulate the natural gas industry so that we may prevent anything to this magnitude to ever occur again in our country. All the aforementioned agencies' assistance has been immeasurable, and we greatly appreciate the seamless methodology of their approach and response to all of our requests to ensure that the citizens we serve maintain a high level of safety. Their compassion and caring in an effort to meet all of the community's needs and our citizens has been nothing short of astounding. In closing, on behalf of Lawrence Fire Chief Brian Moriarty, North Andover Fire Chief William McCarthy, and myself, I would like to thank all of those who have assisted us throughout this ordeal to date and those who continue to assist us with the recovery process. Most importantly, we would like to thank those who reside in our communities for their patience throughout this event and the outpouring of support we have received. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And again, we're in your debt today, but every day for what you do. So we thank you so much. So let's begin with an overarching question. I'd ask each of the witnesses to answer it. Mayor Rivera, Ms. Messina, Chief Mansfield, what grade A through F would you give to Columbia Gas in their response on the night of the incident? And why would you give them that grade?
On the night of the incident, I think that those who were close to this would give them an F. Having been in the military, there's a term people talk about this, like somebody's in the weeds. They're just not really present in the magnitude of the situation. We were pretty present, and then looking for guidance and action from Columbia Gas. We just saw that they were in the weeds. They had no sense of this magnitude.
Ms. Messina.
That night, by the time the first thing that happened with us was that we had an alarm in our big 23-unit plaza, and went down and thought nothing of it. It was in one of the restaurants, and didn't think much of it until the fire truck passed us, and it was like, what's going on here? So I think, it was a very difficult night as far as the response from Columbia. I mean, it wasn't there. I didn't hear anything till The governor came on late at night, but, you know, it was just a lot of panic. For me, it was a little bit reminiscence of, I was in Boston on 9/11, and it was felt a little bit like that, where it was just, what's going on? What do you mean? It didn't feel, like, depending on where you were, it didn't feel like you were either in dire straits or what's going on? It was not a big deal until I walked into my house and smelled gas. That's when I started getting very unnerved.
And what grade would you give them on the first day?
It wasn't there, so for me, it would be, you know, in the D range, because we didn't hear anything. We didn't know what was going on, period.
Okay, Chief Mansfield, where were you when you were made aware that there was a gas-related emergency on September 13th? When did they notify you on that day? And what grade would you give to Columbia Gas for their response?
I wasn't in contact with anybody from Columbia Gas for several hours after the event occurred. Due to the lack of communications, due to the lack of organization, due to the lack of the emergency planning, I would give them an F.
Mayor Rivera, you said in your testimony that Columbia Gas engineers and top leadership were afraid themselves and lacked a clear path to deal with the disaster. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, well, I think we all were afraid. I think the problem is that when you're tasked, you make 5 times the amount of money a year that I make, or 50 times the amount of money I make a year, that you're going to be called to action. And I just felt like we couldn't even get maps from them. And then every time somebody in the room would have a suggestion on how to mitigate or deal with the problem, every idea went on the map and went on the list. And I think in a situation like that, even though I'm the mayor of the city, I'm not really sure that I'm fully equipped to understand the complexities of a gas line and how to mitigate that problem. So I really do think that they were at a loss. And they did send one person. They said that they said national support, but they only sent one person on the ground that day, that night.
And when did they respond to you on that night, Columbia Gas?
I called them first. I got a call from my chief, and then I got a call. Then we all got together, and then we ended up at the site. But on my drive in, I had called the Columbia Gas government affairs person. I called their head engineer. I was breaking the news to them, and so I was kind of surprised that I was doing that, considering that I already had made it halfway. I'd made it all the way down the building that I was in Boston, and I had already been in traffic for a good time when I called them after getting a sense of what was going on, and they still had not known that something was going on.
And that's unbelievable that you're calling them to notify them of what's going on. It was absolutely incredible and unacceptable.
Yeah, I don't know how that happens, and frankly, the first time I talked to that I saw somebody live was when they came up to me and said, "You have to shut the electricity off."
Okay, so I've already referenced this.
I'm sorry. Can I just say when they said you have to evacuate the city?
Yeah. So and again, we should talk about evacuation because the Columbia Gas emergency response plan was woefully inadequate. They failed to imagine that there was a disaster of this scale that could occur, and by doing so, they guaranteed that they would fail to execute a swift and effective response when a system-wide catastrophe did occur. Mayor Rivera, in your testimony, you requested that there be a customer evacuation plan created and revisited every year. What are some of the components that you would like to see in a company evacuation plan?
Well, first of all, they have to have a notification system to make sure that every customer who they get a bill from every month gets notified in a way that's appropriate and in their language immediately as something's happening. I think that their conversations with the 911 folks, with first responders, has to be immediate. And I think that it has to delineate what you would do with those people once you get them out of their homes, how you plan to put them in a place that's safe, how you plan to support them in the long term, and the short term, and then immediately figure out how to get them whole. They stood up a claims process the 2 or 3 days right after. I think everyone saw pictures of what that looked like in Lawrence. They just did it in Lawrence. They didn't even think about doing it that weekend. They never ended. It was a huge shortcoming. But then it really looked like a refugee center. There was no control. If it wasn't for the staff of the city, the towns, and the state police to get people in an orderly fashion, to give them a sense of how to get their claim started, I'm pretty sure we would have had a riot down there.
Yeah, and I understand how utilities think. They don't like to anticipate an accident which can occur. So it's actually my law which requires the distribution of potassium iodide that could protect against thyroid cancer to everyone within a 10-mile radius around the Seabrook nuclear power plant. You have to anticipate that something wrong can go wrong, and thyroid cancer is the single most likely consequence if you're exposed. So here, there was no plan, and they just assumed nothing could go wrong. So Chief Mansfield, Columbia Gas is required to notify fire departments in the event of a grade 1 gas leak, which are severe and potentially dangerous. How quickly are you notified of these leaks by Columbia Gas, and do you feel like the response from the company is sufficient to keep this area safe?
The short answer is no, we don't like their response to how they inform us of grade 1 natural gas leaks. Several of us in the Merrimack Valley have been trying to get the ears of legislators and Columbia Gas. We've had open discussions with Columbia Gas leadership with regards to how we get notified that grade 1 natural gas leaks occur. And typically the response is they find that a grade 1 leak occurs, they go ahead, they mitigate it after they find it, and then they notify the fire department and the law enforcement official as required by Massachusetts state law.
So what you're saying is that the company identifies a serious, potentially dangerous gas leak. They don't call the fire department. They don't call the police department. They fix it as best they can. Then they call you the next day or 2 days later and say, oh, we had a big problem, but we didn't feel we had to call you, the fire department, the police department of the city. Is that correct?
That is correct. The grade one leak is the worst case scenario of a natural gas leak you could possibly have, and it's in their infrastructure. And what they do is they go out, they locate a leak through their surveying process, they'll mitigate the leak, repair it, and then the following day, we don't get a phone call, we get an email from somebody in their operations center that states that they had a grade 1 leak at a particular address, and there's no need for emergency response.
Yeah, so the question of long-term relief is also important, because these businesses, these families, they're going to be impacted, and we've been pushing the Trump administration, Small Business Administration, trying to make sure that there is emergency home heating assistance for everyone who needs it, because we're never going to forget that these communities need help, and we're going to be there every step of the way. Mr. Mayor, Ms. Messina, Chief Mansfield, what grade A through F would you give Columbia Gas's work over the longer-term restoration process, and why?
Sure. This is a double-edged sword. You know, when we first started in that first week, it was pretty bad because we just didn't have any information. As the plan started to get deployed, there were a lot of resources. I mean, as someone who's lived through this, I don't think any of us can really complain about the amount of people that have been put on the ground. The biggest complaint I think that we would have is, again, and I think this is an underlying issue, has been communication. You know, they were there when I called. I would be able to speak to them. They always had people that were available to talk to, but trying to find the right person was difficult, and being able to get some straight answers, especially for the higher end equipment like HVAC units and things like that, you know, what do we do? do we have to replace them? Do we have to fix them? Because it's not like these HVAC units are sitting in a warehouse somewhere. They take months to have to order, and it would take a lot longer to have and put up. So, I mean, I give them clearly, I'd go from a D that I rated them in the beginning to a B+, because I really felt that I could get to somebody and get answers done, and things were getting done faster. So that's the double-edged sword.
Does anyone else want to give a grade to the long-term restoration?
I guess I like the idea of the different points in time. From an F to an of, I think you got to give them an A for fixing the pipe in the street. Everyone thought there was going to be a mass disaster, and there was going to be, you couldn't do it. I've seen many people talking on TV about how it was undoable, so you got to give them an A for that. I think for the fixing the pipes and the appliances in the house, I think that's got to be a D to a C. We knew we needed an army of plumbers on September 14th and 15th, and we were having discussions about plumbers in the first week of November. I'm not sure why Columbia Gas and Gilbane let that most important resource go unattended for so long. And I think they're still at a D with the customer support and making people whole. They still are failing to cut checks to people. They put big numbers on the checks that they're cutting to people. There are still people with fundamental issues unresolved, mainly because they just refuse to cut the check. And I'm telling them they should just cut this check now and not spend money on attorneys, because it's still really going to turn into litigation. But I think all that type of grading goes to underscore, I think, something that I forgot to say in my comments, and that's to mention the people that have been affected. These people have been the most patient and understanding people. Literally, the pipe froze on an RV, and they asked this lady, who clearly couldn't speak that much English anyway, how you feel with it? She's like, oh, it's Mother Nature. It's just, this too shall pass. It is a miracle that we don't have a riot. Right? People have been so thankful for the crap they have to put up with this company every day. It's a blessing on them. And it's another reason why they should double their forces on the claims. Pay these folks. You've put them up through too much.
So thank you. Yeah, we're going to give an A+ to the people from Merrimack Valley
Amen.
for their response, and to all of those who helped them in their response. We thank you. And let me recognize Senator Warren.
So, thank you very much. I just want to ask, did Mr. Bryant stay? Is he in here? How about Mr. Hamrock? Did anybody stay from Columbia Gas?
I represent the people that work there.
Okay, you represent the employees. How about representing the company?
We're here for claims questions.
For what?
Claims questions.
Claims questions. Good. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'll ask about claims. So I wonder who was here to at least hear this and take this information back to Mr. Bryant and Mr. Hamrock. I want to ask actually about the process, about what's happened to the small businesses. We've heard from the mayor, we've heard from the fire chief, but I want to drill down just a little bit on small businesses. Ms. Messina, I appreciate your being here today. Prior to the explosion, you had several businesses, as you testified, several properties in Andover. You were one of the many people whose businesses, as well as your home, was affected by this disaster. Can I just start by asking about some of the financial costs here? How much money did you lose for the weeks that you couldn't operate your businesses?
We're still in the process of trying to put that together. It didn't happen just for the month of October. This is something ongoing. As I said in my testimony, one of the things that we didn't recognize is we were looking at, hey, how come so-and-so hasn't been in? Well, we find out that so-and-so has been living in their home in Maine because it's too uncomfortable to be living here and dealing with this issue. So, we had planned a great month of October, and I just barely broke last year's numbers, if that. We put everything onto it, and in a booming economy where we were seeing increases, it just kind of like came to a stop. I mean, those first 2 weeks, we lost about 30% of our business.
So what you're saying is one of the ways small businesses lost out, obviously, is if they were closed altogether. But the second way is small businesses lost out because there were just a lot fewer people who came in to shop, even if your business was otherwise operational. Is that right?
Correct. I mean, and to add to that was the difficulty of getting to the actual stores. Once the gas ready plan was put into place, I mean, I think we all understood, like I said in my testimony, that 48 miles was a lot. I don't think we understood that there would be areas that were just completely cut off and you would have to be redirected. And there were times you'd go around in circles and you just say, that's it, I'm done, I'm going home.
Okay. And this obviously was affecting your customers. So has Columbia Gas explained to you whether or not they're going to pay for your diminished business during this period of time?
Going through the claims process, we were asked to give information, but most of this information was skewed towards mainly a restaurant or anybody that had a hospitality business, because they're asking me about my food loss and stuff like that, and it's like, no, I'm hot goods. So, in fairness to them right now, we're in the process of still trying to make those parameters for that claim. So my claim is still open, and I have yet to really even talk to somebody because once I found out that